Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. I upload videos every day on 2 different channels, and honestly it takes a lot of time and effort. So if you enjoy the content, please support me with a like and any comment. That small interaction really helps because it tells YouTube that people are enjoying the videos and helps the channel reach more viewers. Thank you so much for all the love and support. And now let's begin. The first thing they teach you at ranger training is that nature doesn't care if you live or die. I learned that lesson long before I ever put on the uniform. My name is Nahile Tapio, and for the past 3 years, I've served as a wilderness ranger in the Monongahela Wilderness Area, one of the most remote regions in the eastern United States. The name Nahile means forest in native Hawaiian, a birthright from my mother's side. Tapio, my chosen surname, comes from the Finnish god of forests and hunting. It felt right when I took the job, a connection to the ancient spirits of these woods that I would soon call home. Most people think being a park ranger is all about telling tourists not to feed the bears and making sure campfires are properly extinguished. But between 2000 and 2010, park rangers were more likely to be assaulted in the line of duty than any other federal officer, including those working for the ATF, Secret Service, and DEA. Add in accidents involving natural disasters, and a ranger can be up to 12 times more likely to die on the job than an FBI agent. What drives someone to choose this life? For me, it began with loss. 5 years ago, my younger brother disappeared while hiking these same mountains. The search lasted 2 weeks. Helicopters scanned from above while ground teams combed through ravines and gullies. I was there every day, pushing deeper into areas the official teams wouldn't go. When they finally called off the search, I stayed. For another month, I lived in these woods, following game trails, sleeping in caves, listening to the whispers of the forest at night. They never found him. Afterward, I couldn't return to my office job in Pittsburgh. Something about the wilderness had gotten under my skin, not just the grief, but a need to understand this place. As one retired ranger once said, the role of a ranger involves 2 parallel images, the daring, resourceful rescuer and firefighter, next to the interpreter and educator. I wanted to be both, to protect people from the wilderness and to protect the wilderness itself. So I applied to the Ranger Service, completed my training, and requested assignment to Monongahela. I became certified in wilderness emergency medical response, technical rope rescue, and bear management. I learned to read the forest, not just the trails and landmarks, but the subtle signs that tell you when something isn't right. And in these mountains, things often aren't right. My cabin sits on the eastern ridge overlooking Blackwater Lake, a pristine body of water that reflects the sky like a mirror on calm days. It's simple: 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, bathroom, and a main room with a stone fireplace. Solar panels provide minimal electricity, but I've grown accustomed to living by lantern light when the clouds roll in. The nearest town is Silver Creek, population 867, about 20 miles down a winding mountain road. My Australian friend Kai visits a few times a year. He's an anthropologist studying indigenous cultures worldwide, particularly their relationship with wilderness spaces. My Canadian friends, Emily and Devon, stay at the guest cabin across the lake during summer months. They're wildlife photographers who've published several books on North American forest ecosystems. Tonight, I sit on my porch, watching darkness creep across the lake. A storm is building to the west. Not just rain, but something heavier. The kind of atmospheric pressure that makes your ears pop and sets the local wildlife on edge. No birds call, no insects chirp, just the low moan of wind through pine needles. My radio crackles to life. Ranger Tapio, do you copy? It's Stella from Dispatch, her voice tight with concern. I grab the handset. Copy, Stella. What's going on? We've got hikers missing on the North Ridge Trail. Family of 3, father, mother, 14-year-old daughter. They were supposed to check in at Pinwood Shelter by sundown. Another hiking group reported they never arrived. I glance at the darkening sky. Storms moving in fast. How long have they been overdue? About 3 hours now. The father made radio contact around noon when they were at Miller's Crossing. Nothing since. Miller's Crossing to Pinewood Shelter should take 4 hours, 5 at most. If they left at noon and still hadn't arrived, something had delayed them significantly or taken them off trail. I'll head to Miller's Crossing and work my way toward Pinewood, I say, already moving inside to grab my pack. Alert search and rescue that we might need additional resources, especially if this storm hits full force. Already done. Teams on standby, but they can't deploy helicopters in this weather. You're the closest ranger to their last known position. Roger that. I'll radio once I find something. Be careful out there, Nahile. Something feels off tonight. I clip the radio to my belt and begin gathering supplies. In these situations, rangers often stay through the night in brutal conditions to help lost hikers, sometimes in temperatures far below zero, struggling to maintain fires with icy branches while waiting for rescue helicopters. My go bag is always ready: first aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, high-calorie rations, flares, extra batteries, thermal blankets. I add additional medical supplies, a more powerful flashlight, and my satellite phone. After a moment's hesitation, I strap my service pistol to my hip. We don't usually carry firearms on search and rescue operations, but Stella's words echo in my mind. Something feels off tonight. The storm reaches my cabin just as I'm heading out. Rain hammers against the metal roof like thrown gravel. Lightning splits the sky, illuminating the churning surface of the lake below. In that brief flash, I see something that makes me freeze. A figure stands at the lake's edge, impossibly tall and broad-shouldered, too large to be human. Then darkness swallows it again. I switch on my flashlight, sweeping its beam toward the shore, but see nothing except rain-pocked water and swaying pines. A trick of the light, I tell myself. Storm shadows playing on my anxiety. But as I shoulder my pack and step off the porch into the downpour, a sound rises above the wind and rain. A long, mournful howl that is neither wolf nor coyote nor bear. It echoes across the lake, reverberating through the valley, making the hair on my arms stand on end. My brother used to tell stories about the sounds he heard deep in these woods, especially at night. Strange calls that followed him, voices that sounded almost, but not quite, human. I dismissed them as campfire exaggerations. Now I'm not so sure. I check my compass, pull up my hood, and begin walking north. The missing family needs me, and every minute counts. But with each step into the forest, the feeling grows stronger. I'm being watched by something ancient and patient, something that knows these mountains far better than I ever will, something that doesn't want to be found. The North Ridge Trail would typically take me 40 minutes to reach from my cabin. Tonight, fighting against wind-driven rain and navigating by flashlight, it takes over an hour. By the time I reach Miller's Crossing, a wooden bridge spanning a usually gentle creek now transformed into a raging torrent, I'm soaked through despite my weatherproof gear. I sweep my flashlight along the muddy trail, looking for footprints. The rain has washed away most signs, but under the partial shelter of a large hemlock, I spot what I'm looking for. 3 sets of boot prints heading east along the trail, one large, presumably the father's, and 2 smaller sets. They're several hours old, but they confirm the family at least made it this far. I follow the trail, moving as quickly as safety allows. Every quarter mile, I stop to call out, "Hello, Forest Service. Can anyone hear me?" Only the wind answers. 2 miles past the crossing, the trail forks. The left path continues toward Pinewood Shelter, the family's intended destination. The right branch descends into Whispering Valley, a densely forested area popular with wildlife enthusiasts but considered too rugged for casual hikers, especially families with children. I pause, shining my light down both paths. The rain has let up slightly and I can make out fresh tracks in the mud, heading right toward the valley. Why would they leave the main trail, especially with a storm approaching? I radio dispatch. "Stella, I've tracked the missing hikers to the North Ridge Fork. They've deviated from their route and headed into Whispering Valley." The radio crackles with static before Stella's voice breaks through. "Confirm they went into the valley? That doesn't make sense with their experience level. Tracks are clear. 3 sets of boots, right-size distribution for the family. I'm following them in. Use extreme caution. That area has had several incidents this season." She doesn't elaborate, but she doesn't need to. We both know what she means. 3 hikers have reported strange encounters in Whispering Valley since early spring. Unusual sounds, sensation of being followed, and in one case, a campsite that had been completely destroyed while the hiker was on a day trek. The official reports blamed black bears, but the descriptions didn't quite fit. I've avoided patrolling that section at night. Until now, the valley trail descends sharply, switching back through stands of ancient oak and maple. The trees here are older, their trunks massive and gnarled with age. Even in daylight, little sunlight reaches the forest floor. Now, in the storm-dark night, my flashlight beam seems swallowed by the pressing darkness. A mile down the trail, I find the first sign that something's wrong. A child's pink water bottle lying on its side, half buried in mud. Next to it, the trail shows signs of a scuffle, footprints overlapping chaotically, a deeper impression where someone might have fallen. I crouch down, examining the scene carefully. No blood, which is good, but the footprints leaving the area are different. Deeper, more spaced out, as if they were running. Something had frightened them badly enough to flee. I stand and sweep my light in a wide arc through the trees. That's when I see it, about 20 yards off trail, a backpack hanging from a low branch. It sways slightly in the wind, as if recently placed there. Moving carefully through the underbrush, I approach the pack. It's a man's hiking backpack, blue with black trim, good quality. I check the outer pockets and find a wallet. The driver's license confirms it belongs to Michael Chen, the father of the missing family. Why would he leave his pack hanging in a tree? An old woodcraft technique flashes through my mind, hanging packs to keep them from bears. But you'd typically use a much higher branch, and you'd hang all your packs together, not just one. Unless he was leaving it as a marker, a sign for rescuers to find. I scan the area beyond the backpack and spot broken branches and disturbed ground heading east, away from the trail. They were moving cross-country now, no longer following any path. As I prepare to follow, my radio emits a burst of static that makes me jump. Through the white noise, I hear fragments of Stella's voice, additional reports, same area. Be advised. Then nothing but crackling interference. I try to respond, but the signal is gone. The valley's known for dead zones, places where the steep terrain blocks radio transmission. I'm on my own until I can get back to higher ground. Taking a deep breath, I continue in the direction of the broken branches. The rain has almost stopped, but water still drips from the canopy above, creating a constant patter that masks other sounds. The air feels heavy with moisture and something else. A musky, animalistic scent that grows stronger as I move deeper into the untracked forest. After 20 minutes of careful progress, I hear it. A child's whimper, barely audible, coming from a dense thicket ahead. Hello? I call softly. I'm Ranger Tapio with the Forest Service. I'm here to help. Silence, then a whispered voice. Is it gone? I move forward slowly, keeping my light low. Who's there? Are you hurt? A girl's face appears between branches. The missing 14-year-old, her eyes wide with terror. Please, she whispers. It might hear you. What might hear me? I ask, kneeling to her level. Where are your parents? She points a trembling finger deeper into the woods. It took them. The tall man. The one that isn't a man. A chill runs through me that has nothing to do with my wet clothes. What do you mean? What did it look like? Like shadow standing up. Huge. Covered in hair. Her voice breaks. It smelled like rotten leaves and wet dog. It made noises, not talking but not animal sounds either. I recognize the description immediately. It matches dozens of accounts I've read. Stories told by hikers, hunters, and even other rangers. Stories most of us dismiss as campfire tales or misidentifications of bears. Bigfoot. I've never been a believer. In 3 years of ranging these mountains, I've never seen evidence that convinced me such a creature exists. But the terror in this girl's eyes is real, and something took her parents. What's your name? I ask gently. Madison. Madison, I'm going to get you out of here safely. Then we'll find your parents. Can you walk? She nods, crawling out from the thicket. Her clothes are torn and muddy, but she appears uninjured. It happened so fast, she says as I help her to her feet. We got lost in the storm and Dad thought he saw a cabin light through the trees. We went toward it, but then it was gone. That's when we heard the screaming. Screaming? Like nothing I've ever heard before. Dad told us to run back to the trail, but we got separated in the rain. Then I saw it, coming through the trees. It grabbed Mom first, then went after Dad when he tried to help her. He yelled at me to hide. I hand Madison a thermal blanket from my pack and give her some water. Which direction did it take them? She points northeast, toward the area locals call the Dark Hollows, a section of old-growth forest that's never been logged, where the trees grow so densely that their canopies create perpetual twilight below. I've been in those hollows during daylight hours and found them disorienting. At night, in a storm, they would be nearly impossible to navigate without expert knowledge of the terrain, knowledge that whatever took her parents seems to possess. I check my watch. It's past midnight now. The storm has moved on, but a heavy mist clings to the forest floor, obscuring anything more than 10 feet away. Search and rescue won't be able to deploy until dawn at the earliest. Madison, I need to get you to safety first, then I can come back with a team to find your parents. She grabs my arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. No, it'll be too late. It was dragging them away. It's going to. She can't finish the sentence. I face an impossible choice. Follow protocol and escort the girl to safety, potentially abandoning her parents to whatever fate awaits them, or track this creature into one of the most dangerous sections of the wilderness at night, with a traumatized teenager in tow. In my 3 years as a ranger, I've broken protocol exactly twice. Both times involved immediate life-threatening situations. Both times I was reprimanded afterward, but people lived who might otherwise have died. Okay, I say finally. We'll look for them together, but you have to stay right with me and do exactly what I say. If I tell you to run, you run. Understand? Madison nods, determination replacing some of the fear in her eyes. I try the radio once more, but still get nothing but static. I send a text message through my satellite phone giving dispatch our approximate position and intentions. Whether it goes through is anyone's guess. Satellite coverage in these valleys is spotty at best. Then we begin moving northeast, toward the dark hollows, following a trail of broken vegetation and disturbed ground that suggests something large passed this way, dragging heavy objects behind it. The mist grows thicker as we progress, turning the beam of my flashlight into a diffuse glow that illuminates little. Sounds seem muffled and distorted. The drip of water from leaves, the occasional rustle of nighttime creatures, our own footsteps. Madison stays close behind me, her breathing quick but controlled. For a 14-year-old who just witnessed something traumatic, she's holding up remarkably well. Have you heard stories about the tall man before? I ask quietly as we walk. My dad said they were just legends, she replies. Native American myths about forest spirits or something. He didn't believe in any of it. I nod. The local indigenous tribes have stories about forest beings, not malevolent creatures, but powerful spirits who protect the wilderness from human intrusion. They're known by different names depending on the tribe. Sasquatch from the Salish Sasquatch, Wetiko or Wendigo to the Algonquin. Some tribes believe they appear as messengers of warning, telling humans to change their ways. But there's a difference between cultural mythology and what Madison described, a flesh and blood creature that attacked her family. We've been walking for about 15 minutes when the ground begins to slope downward. The trees loom larger here, ancient sentinels that have stood for centuries. The underbrush thins, replaced by a carpet of moss and ferns that muffles our footsteps. Madison suddenly grabs my arm, stopping me. Listen, she whispers. I hold my breath and strain my ears. At first I hear nothing unusual, just the ambient sounds of the nocturnal forest. Then it comes, so faint I almost miss it. A low, rhythmic sound, like drumming or thumping, coming from somewhere ahead. What is that? Madison asks. I don't know, I admit, but it's the direction the trail leads. We move forward more cautiously now. The mist swirls around our legs, and the drumming grows marginally louder. It has an irregular pattern, not mechanical but not random either, almost like heartbeats. The trail of broken vegetation ends at the mouth of a ravine. The walls rise 30 feet on either side, creating a natural channel that funnels the mist into an opaque wall ahead of us. The drumming emanates from somewhere beyond that wall. I hesitate. Every instinct tells me not to enter that ravine. It's a natural trap. Limited visibility, difficult terrain, few escape routes if something goes wrong. My parents are in there, Madison says, reading my hesitation. I can feel it. Before I can respond, a scream pierces the night, human, terrified, and quickly cut short. It came from inside the ravine. Madison bolts forward before I can stop her, disappearing into the mist. Madison, wait, I call, racing after her. The ravine floor is treacherous, slick rock and exposed roots that threaten to twist an ankle with every step. I move as quickly as I dare, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly as I try to catch sight of Madison ahead. The mist parts occasionally, giving me glimpses of the path ahead but no sign of the girl. The walls of the ravine narrow as I progress, the drumming growing louder, more insistent. It seems to come from all directions now, as if the sound is bouncing off the rock walls around me. Then, abruptly, the ravine ends in a circular clearing about 50 feet across. The mist is thinner here, and my flashlight illuminates a scene from a nightmare. At the center of the clearing stands an enormous figure, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. Its back is to me, and it's hunched over something on the ground. Something that moves weakly. Madison crouches behind a boulder at the edge of the clearing, frozen in place, watching the scene before her. I should call out, fire a warning shot, do something to scare the creature away. But my voice dies in my throat, and my hands refuse to move toward my weapon. An irrational primal fear holds me rooted to the spot, the instinctive recognition of an apex predator. The creature straightens suddenly, its massive head turning slightly. It sniffs the air, then emits a low, rumbling growl that seems to vibrate through the ground beneath my feet. It knows we're here. In that moment, the choice is narrowed to one. Protect the child. I rush forward, grabbing Madison and pulling her back into the ravine, away from the clearing. She struggles against me, crying out for her parents, but I don't stop. If that thing decides to charge, our only hope is to reach narrower confines where its size might work against it. Behind us, the growl changes to a roar, a sound so powerful and alien that it seems to bypass my ears and vibrate directly through my bones. Then comes the impact of heavy footsteps, gaining speed, coming our way. "Run!" I shout, pushing Madison ahead of me. "Don't look back!" We sprint through the ravine, slipping on wet stone, crashing through underbrush. The creature follows, its footfalls shaking the ground. It's impossibly fast for something so large, closing the distance with each stride. 50 yards from the ravine entrance, my flashlight catches a narrow crevice in the wall to our right, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Without hesitation, I grab Madison and push her toward it. "Get in, go as deep as you can." She doesn't argue, wiggling into the tight space. I follow immediately after, scraping my shoulders against the rough stone as I force myself inside. The crevice extends back about 10 feet before opening slightly into a small hollow in the ravine wall. Not a true cave, but enough space for us to huddle together, out of immediate reach. Not a moment too soon. A massive shape blots out the faint light at the crevice entrance. The creature paces back and forth, occasionally pressing against the opening, testing if it can reach us. Its breathing is heavy and wet-sounding. The smell is overwhelming, musky and primal, like wet fur and decay. For what feels like hours, we remain frozen in our stone refuge while the creature tries to reach us. Sometimes it retreats, only to return with renewed determination. It makes a series of vocalizations, grunts, howls, and occasionally sounds disturbingly close to words, though in no language I recognize. Madison trembles against me, her face buried against my jacket to muffle her sobs. I keep my arm around her shoulders, my other hand on my pistol, though I doubt it would do much against the mass of the thing outside. "What about my parents?" she whispers eventually. "We'll find them, I promise," with more confidence than I feel. But we need to stay alive to do that. Sometime near dawn, the sounds outside change. The creature's movements become more agitated, and its vocalizations shift to a higher pitch. Then, abruptly, it's gone, the heavy footsteps receding rapidly down the ravine. I wait another 20 minutes before daring to look outside. The eastern sky has lightened to a deep blue, pushing back the darkness. The ravine is empty. "Stay here," I tell Madison. "I'm going to check if it's safe." I ease out of the crevice, weapon drawn, scanning the area. The morning mist still clings to the ground, but visibility is much better than during the night. There's no sign of the creature, but the ground tells a story. Massive footprints pressed deep into the mud, broken branches and drag marks leading back toward the clearing. My radio suddenly crackles to life, making me jump. "Ranger Tapio, do you copy? This is Search and Rescue Bravo Team, responding to your last known coordinates." Relief floods through me as I respond. "Copy, Bravo Team. I have one survivor with me, juvenile female. Parents still missing. We've encountered a situation requesting immediate extraction and additional personnel." "Roger that. Helicopter is en route to the coordinates you're transmitting. ETA 15 minutes. Can you move to a clearing for pickup?" I look back toward the ravine entrance, calculating distances and terrain. "Affirmative. We'll move to the extraction point." I help Madison from the crevice, noting the exhaustion in her face. "Help is coming," I tell her. "We need to move to open ground for pickup." "But my parents." "The rescue team will help us find them. Right now, we need to get you to safety." She nods reluctantly and we begin making our way out of the ravine. As we emerge into the broader forest, the morning light filters through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The forest feels different in daylight, less threatening, more familiar, but I can't shake the feeling that we're still being watched. Occasionally, I catch movement from the corner of my eye, only to find nothing when I turn to look. Madison notices it too, pressing closer to me as we walk. "It's still out there," she whispers. "We're almost out," I assure her. "Just a little further." We reach a small clearing about a quarter mile from the ravine, barely large enough for a helicopter to land, but it will have to do. I radio our position and receive confirmation that the chopper is 5 minutes out. As we wait, Madison suddenly stiffens beside me, her eyes fixed on the tree line to our north. "What's wrong?" I ask, following her gaze. "I saw it," she breathes. "Just for a second. It's watching us." I scan the dense forest edge but see nothing unusual. No movement, no massive shape among the trees. but the feeling of being observed intensifies, raising goosebumps along my arms. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors breaks the tension. The sound grows rapidly louder as the rescue chopper approaches, hovering over the clearing before settling gently onto the ground. Two rescue personnel jump out, rushing toward us while the pilot keeps the rotors spinning. "Are you hurt?" One of them shouts over the noise. "We're okay," I call back. "But there are two more people missing. Her parents. They were taken last night by..." I hesitate, not sure how to describe what we encountered. "By what?" the rescuer asks. Madison answers before I can, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "By a monster." But no one's going to believe us, are they? The rescuer exchanges a glance with his partner, then looks back at me with an expression I can't quite read. "You'd be surprised," he says finally. "This isn't the first call like this we've had this season." As they usher us toward the helicopter, I glance back at the forest one last time. Perhaps it's a trick of light and shadow, or perhaps my mind is creating patterns where none exist. But I swear I see a massive, dark figure standing among the distant trees, watching us depart. Then the shape steps backward, melting into the forest like it was never there at all. The helicopter lifts off, carrying us away from the wilderness and back to civilization. But as we rise above the canopy, I know with certainty that I'll be returning to those dark hollows. Madison's parents are still out there, and whatever took them, whether beast or myth or something in between, is still out there too. And now it knows my face. 3 days after the rescue, I sit in the Silver Creek Ranger Station office, staring at my computer screen. The search for Madison's parents, Michael and Jennifer Chen, continues, but hope dwindles with each passing day. 5 search teams have combed the dark hollows and surrounding areas. Thermal imaging drones have scanned every ravine and gully. Cadaver dogs have followed countless trails that ultimately lead nowhere. The official report sits incomplete before me, cursor blinking at the end of a sentence I can't seem to finish. The cause of the Chen family's separation appears to be, what do I write? That a creature science says doesn't exist attacked them and dragged 2 adults into the wilderness. That the Bigfoot of campfire stories is real and hunting humans in my jurisdiction. I bang out undetermined and submit the form. It's the coward's way out, but I've learned that some truths aren't meant for official channels. Madison has been staying with her aunt in Pittsburgh. The trauma specialists say she's handling things as well as can be expected, but she refuses to change her story. In every interview, she describes the same creature, 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, moving with incredible speed and strength. Her consistency is remarkable for someone her age, which makes her account all the more disturbing. The door to the office swings open, and Ranger Director Colin Blackwood enters. He's been with the service for 30 years and runs the Eastern District with military precision. "Tapio," he says by way of greeting. "Got a minute?" I nod, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. He sits, placing a thick manila folder between us. "You did good work getting the Chen girl out safely," he begins. "Not many rangers would have pursued into that terrain at night, especially with a storm moving through." "Thank you, sir. I just wish we'd found her parents." He taps the folder. "That's what I want to discuss. This isn't the first incident in that area, not by a long shot." He opens the folder to reveal dozens of reports spanning decades. Missing hikers, destroyed campsites, unexplained sounds, and strange tracks. Many include the same details: unusual howls, strong musky odors, feelings of being watched, and in some cases glimpses of large, hair-covered figures moving through the trees. "We don't typically share this information outside the senior ranger staff," Blackwood explains. "Too much risk of panic, tourism impact, and frankly ridicule from the scientific community. But given what you experienced, I think you need to be aware of the pattern." I flip through the reports, recognizing locations throughout the Monongahela wilderness. Many cluster around the Dark Hollows and Whispering Valley. "How long has this been happening?" I ask. "First recorded incident was in 1879. Lumber surveyor disappeared near what we now call Whispering Valley. His journal was found a year later with entries describing moving trees that followed his camp at night. I think about what I saw in the ravine, the massive figure hunched over something on the ground." "You believe these reports? That there's something out there?" Blackwood leans back, rubbing his weathered face. "What I believe doesn't matter. The data shows a recurring pattern of incidents that conventional explanations don't adequately address. Whether it's an undocumented species, a psychological response to wilderness isolation, or something else entirely, I can't say. But I do know this: whatever it is, it's becoming more active." He turns to the most recent reports. 17 incidents in the past year alone. That's triple our historical average. "Why?" "That's what I want you to find out." He slides a key across the desk. This opens a storage unit in the basement. It contains additional files too sensitive for the main archive, plus physical evidence collected over the years. I'm assigning you as lead investigator on these cases, effective immediately. I stare at the key. Sir, with all due respect, I'm not qualified for this. I'm a wilderness ranger, not a cryptozoologist. You're exactly what we need. Someone who's seen it firsthand but still maintains analytical thinking. Someone who knows these mountains and can separate facts from folklore. He stands, heading for the door. Besides, you were going to investigate anyway, weren't you? At least this way you'll have resources and authority. He's right. I haven't been able to think about anything else since that night in the ravine. What about my regular duties? I ask. Consider them reduced for now. Focus on this. Find answers. He pauses at the door. And Tapio, be careful. Whatever's out there, it's survived this long by staying hidden. It won't appreciate your attention. After Blackwood leaves, I sit for a long moment, considering the implications of what I've just learned. The agency has been tracking these incidents for over a century but keeping them compartmentalized. How many rangers before me have faced what I saw in those woods? I take the elevator to the basement level, a fluorescent-lit concrete expanse filled with maintenance equipment and archived records. The storage unit is in the far corner, separated from the main area by a chain-link fence. The key turns smoothly in the padlock. Inside, metal shelving units line the walls, packed with boxes labeled by date and location. A large table dominates the center, currently empty except for a folder marked Current Investigation - Chen Disappearance. I open it to find photos from the ravine where we encountered the creature, close-ups of the massive footprints, broken vegetation, and something I hadn't noticed in the darkness: long, coarse hairs caught on tree bark about 7 feet above the ground. According to the attached lab report, the hairs belong to no known species. A map on the wall shows the Monongahela wilderness with red pins marking incident locations. They form a clear pattern, a rough circle with the dark hollows at its center. My cabin sits at the southern edge of this circle. As I examine the evidence, my phone buzzes. It's Kai, my Australian friend, responding to a message I'd sent asking about indigenous legends of forest creatures. Found some interesting connections, flying in tomorrow. Much to discuss. I'm about to reply when my radio crackles. Dispatch calling all available rangers to assist with a lost hiker near Timber Ridge, miles from my current investigation area. For a moment I consider ignoring it, but duty wins out. The mysteries of the Dark Hollows have waited this long. They can wait a few more hours. By the time I return to my cabin that evening, the sun has already disappeared behind the western mountains. The lost hiker, a college student who had underestimated both the terrain and his own abilities, is safely back with his friends, suffering nothing worse than a sprained ankle and wounded pride. As I pull up to my cabin, headlights illuminating the weathered porch, I notice something immediately wrong. The front door stands slightly ajar, moving gently in the evening breeze. I always lock up when I leave, even for short periods. Drawing my sidearm, I approach cautiously. No lights shine from within, but as I reach the porch steps, a powerful odor hits me. The same musky, animal smell I encountered in the ravine. My hand trembles slightly as I push the door fully open, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. The main room has been ransacked. Furniture overturned, cabinets emptied onto the floor, books pulled from shelves. But it's not the destruction that stops me cold. It's the message scratched deep into my wooden dining table: leave them alone. 3 simple words, carved with something sharp and powerful enough to gouge nearly half an inch into solid oak. Below the words is a crude symbol, what appears to be a footprint with 5 toes. I back out of the cabin, sweeping my light and weapon in a wide arc around the property. Nothing moves in the surrounding forest, but the feeling of being watched is overwhelming. I retreat to my vehicle and radio for backup, reporting a break-in at my location. While waiting, I circle the cabin, maintaining a safe distance. The evidence is unmistakable: massive footprints in the soft earth around my home, some measuring nearly 18 inches in length. Broken branches on trees where something large pushed through. Deep scratches on the cabin's exterior walls. A patrol car arrives 20 minutes later. Deputy Rivera from the county sheriff's office, who handles law enforcement for the more remote areas around Silver Creek. Jesus Tapio, he says after surveying the scene. What the hell happened here? I'm not sure, I lie. I was responding to a rescue call, came back to find this. He crouches to examine one of the footprints, his flashlight highlighting its enormous size. Bear, maybe? Though I've never seen one do this kind of targeted damage. Maybe, I say, not wanting to voice the alternative. Rivera takes photos and collects what little evidence there is, but we both know this won't lead to an arrest. There are no fingerprints, no DNA beyond the unidentifiable hairs, no suspects that would make sense in an official report. After he leaves, I don't go back inside. Instead, I drive to the small motel in Silver Creek and check into a room for the night. As I lie on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I replay the warning carved into my table. Leave them alone. Not just leave, but leave them alone. The Chens, the creature or creatures, doesn't want me looking for the missing couple, which means they might still be alive. Sleep eludes me that night, my mind churning with possibilities, none of them comforting. Kai arrives the following afternoon, his lanky frame folded awkwardly into the passenger seat of my vehicle as we drive back to the ranger station. I've told him everything, the encounter in the ravine, the evidence in the basement storage, and now the warning in my cabin. Unlike most people, Kai doesn't dismiss my account or suggest psychological explanations. As an anthropologist specializing in indigenous cultures, he's encountered too many consistent stories across different civilizations to dismiss them all as mere myth. The interesting thing, he says as we pull into the station parking lot, is how similar the descriptions are across completely unconnected cultures. The Pacific Northwest tribes have Sasquatch, the Himalayan peoples have Yeti, Australia's Aboriginal peoples speak of the Yowie. Different names but remarkably consistent physical descriptions and behaviors. That still doesn't tell me what I'm dealing with, I point out. No, but it suggests something real as the common source of these legends. Something that's managed to remain largely hidden despite human expansion. He pauses. There's something else you should know. Many indigenous stories describe these beings as highly intelligent, with their own language and social structures. Not just animals, but a different kind of people. The thought sends a chill through me. If these creatures possess human-like intelligence, that changes everything about how I approach this investigation and how dangerous it might be. In the basement storage unit, Kai moves methodically through the archived materials while I organize the current evidence. His academic training gives him insights I might miss, recognizing patterns and connections across disparate reports. Look at this, he says after an hour of research, pointing to a series of incident reports from the 1940s. There was a major logging operation planned for the Dark Hollows area. 3 survey teams were sent in, all experienced mysterious accidents, equipment failures, injuries, disappearances. The project was eventually abandoned. You think these creatures were protecting their territory? Kai nods. It's a consistent pattern. Whenever human activity threatens to encroach significantly on the core territory, incidents increase. It's not random aggression, it's defensive. I think about Madison's family who were simply hiking on established trails. That doesn't explain the Chens. No, Kai admits. That's an escalation. Something has changed the normal behavioral patterns. We spend the rest of the day compiling a timeline of incidents, mapping them against human activities in the region. By evening, a disturbing picture emerges. Incidents have increased dramatically since the state approved preliminary surveys for a potential resort development near Blackwater Lake, less than 5 miles from the Dark Hollows. That has to be it, I say, circling the proposed development site on our map. They're reacting to the threat of major construction in their territory. It's possible, Kai agrees, but it doesn't explain why they'd take 2 adults hostage instead of simply frightening them away. My phone rings. Madison's aunt calling with unexpected news. Madison insists she needs to speak with you, she tells me. She says she remembered something important. 20 minutes later, I'm on a video call with Madison, her pale face framed by the hospital room behind her. She's been readmitted for observation after experiencing what doctors called stress-induced seizures. I remember what it said, she tells me without preamble. The creature, when it took my parents, it made sounds, like talking but not really words. Except once, it said something I understood. What did it say, Madison? Trade. Her voice drops to a whisper. It said trade. Then it looked right at me before it took them away. After ending the call, I sit in stunned silence. Kai watches me, waiting. It spoke, I finally say. The creature said trade when it took the Chens. Trade, Kai repeats thoughtfully. Trading the parents for what? The answer hits me with sudden clarity. For their territory. The resort development, it would destroy acres of forest, right in their home range. You think they're holding hostages to stop construction? Kai sounds skeptical. That's remarkably sophisticated thinking. If they're as intelligent as the legends suggest, why not? They've tried scaring people away for decades. Maybe they've learned it's not enough. It sounds absurd when spoken aloud. Cryptid creatures kidnapping humans as leverage against development, yet the evidence points to something far more complex than an animal protecting its territory. We need to get back into those woods, I say. If the Chens are still alive, they're somewhere in the dark hollows. Kai nods slowly. I'm coming with you. It's too dangerous. You're not trained for this kind of operation. You need someone who understands what you might be communicating with, he insists. Besides, I've done field work in some of the most remote places on Earth. I can handle myself. I want to argue further, but he's right. If these creatures are truly intelligent, approaching them with empathy and understanding might be more effective than weapons and tracking equipment. We spend the next day preparing. I requisition additional gear from the ranger station, enhanced communications equipment, thermal imaging devices, extended survival supplies. Officially, I log it as preparation for an extended search operation for the Chen family. Kai contacts colleagues in the anthropology department at Carnegie Mellon, gathering any information that might help us communicate with or understand non-human intelligence. It's fringe research, speculative at best, but we need every advantage. By the second morning, we're ready. I leave a sealed envelope with Ranger Director Blackwood, containing all our research and theories, with instructions to open it if we don't return in 3 days. As we load the last supplies into my vehicle, Blackwood approaches, concern evident in his weathered face. You're going after them, aren't you? He asks quietly. The Chen family. We have new information, I say, not quite answering his question. Something that might help locate them. He studies me for a long moment. Tapio, in 30 years I've never seen anyone who encountered these things close up come back unchanged. Be careful what you discover out there. What do you mean? He looks toward the distant mountains, their peaks obscured by morning mist. Some knowledge changes how you see the world. Forever. He hands me a small device, a locator beacon of military grade. If things go sideways, activate this. We'll come for you, no questions asked. I pocket the beacon, thanking him with a nod. An hour later, Kai and I are hiking up the North Ridge Trail. Despite the bright autumn day, few other hikers are about. The recent disappearances have made people nervous about venturing too far into the wilderness. We bypass the main trail junction, taking the path into Whispering Valley once again. The forest feels different in daylight, less menacing, but no less watchful. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig draws our attention. We're being observed, Kai says softly as we approach the ravine where Madison and I encountered the creature. Have been since we entered the valley. I nod, having felt the same sensation. Eyes following our progress, always just beyond the range of perception. At the ravine entrance, we pause to arrange our equipment. The plan is to proceed to the clearing where I last saw the Chens, then attempt to establish peaceful contact using methods Kai has developed based on primate communication studies. If these beings are territorial but intelligent, he explains, approaching with clear, non-threatening signals is essential. No weapons visible, controlled movements and consistent vocal tones. And if they're not interested in peaceful contact, he pats his pocket. Then we use your director's panic button and hope they're slower than your rescue teams. We enter the ravine cautiously, moving at a deliberate pace that allows any observers to clearly see our intentions. Kai occasionally makes a low, melodic sound, a vocalization he believes communicates peaceful intent across multiple primate species. The ravine opens to the same clearing where I saw the creature days earlier. In daylight, details emerge that darkness had hidden, a circle of stones at the center, arranged too precisely to be natural. The ground around it shows signs of regular use, packed earth, lack of undergrowth, small objects placed in apparent patterns. This is a gathering place, Kai whispers, excitement overriding caution. These are deliberate arrangements, symbolic communication. Before I can respond, a sound freezes us both, the snap of a heavy branch from the far side of the clearing. We turn slowly to see a massive figure emerge from the tree line. It stands upright on 2 legs, at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark brown hair. The face is the most startling feature, a blend of ape-like characteristics with an unsettlingly human-like expression of intelligence. Deep-set eyes observe us with unmistakable awareness and calculation. Kai begins his vocalization. Soft, rhythmic sounds that rise and fall in a pattern. The creature tilts its head, listening. Then, to my astonishment, it responds, not with words, but with a similar pattern of sounds, deeper and more resonant. It's working, Kai breathes. It's establishing communication. The creature takes a step forward, then another. Despite my racing heart, I hold my ground. It approaches until it stands barely 10 feet away, close enough that I can smell its musky odor and hear its deep rhythmic breathing. Then it makes a gesture. Arm extended, palm up, fingers curled inward. It wants us to follow, Kai translates. Against every instinct for self-preservation, we follow as the creature turns and moves into the forest beyond the clearing. It travels with surprising grace for its size, navigating the dense undergrowth without disturbing more than necessary. After 20 minutes of steep climbing, we emerge into another clearing, this one larger and clearly modified. Fallen logs arranged as seating, a crude shelter of branches and hides against one rock face, and most shocking of all, other creatures moving about the space. I count 5 individuals of varying sizes. 2 appear to be juveniles, their movements more energetic and curious as they observe us from behind larger adults. The group has the demeanor of a clan or family unit, with clear social dynamics visible in their positioning and interactions. And then I see them, Michael and Jennifer Chen, sitting against the rock face. They're alive, though disheveled and clearly frightened. Jennifer has a crude bandage around her leg, suggesting an injury, but otherwise they appear unharmed. Oh my God, I whisper. They're alive. The largest creature, clearly the leader of the group, gestures toward the Chens, then makes a sweeping motion toward the south, in the direction of the proposed resort development. It repeats one vocalization several times, which even to my untrained ear sounds remarkably like trade. Kai steps forward, making careful gestures as he vocalizes in response. The creatures watch him intently, occasionally exchanging sounds among themselves. It's clear they're discussing his communication. What are you telling them? I ask quietly. That we understand their concern about the development, Kai explains. That holding humans won't help their cause. It will bring more humans with weapons. I'm suggesting an alternative approach. The leader steps closer to Kai, making a series of complex sounds and gestures. Kai responds in kind, the exchange continuing for several minutes while I stand transfixed by the impossible conversation unfolding before me. Finally, Kai turns to me, his expression serious. They're willing to release the Chens on one condition, that we help protect their territory from destruction. They've watched us enough to know you have authority among humans. They want your promise. The absurdity of the situation nearly overwhelms me. Negotiating with creatures that officially don't exist to prevent a development project I have no actual control over. Yet the intelligence in the leader's eyes is unmistakable. This is no animal acting on instinct, but a thinking being fighting for its home. Tell them I promise to do everything in my power, I say. But I need to explain how human systems work. It may take time and different approaches. Kai translates my response. The leader watches me intently, as if judging my sincerity directly rather than relying on the words. Finally, it makes a decisive gesture toward the Chens. 2 of the smaller creatures help Jennifer to her feet, supporting her as she limps forward. Michael follows, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looks between us and the creatures that have held them captive. Are you really talking to them? He asks Kai. What are they? Later, I tell him, moving to help support Jennifer. Right now, we need to get you both out of here safely. The leader makes one final vocalization, longer and more complex than before. Kai listens intently, then translates. They say they've lived in these mountains since before humans built their first fires here. They don't want war, but they will defend what's theirs. We have one changing of the seasons to show progress, or they will find other ways to protect their territory. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I say, helping the Chens toward the path back to the ravine. As we depart, I glance back once more at the gathering of creatures, beings that have managed to exist alongside humanity for millennia without being definitively discovered. Their eyes reflect an ancient wisdom and patience that humbles me. Whatever they are, undocumented species, evolutionary offshoot, or something else entirely, they deserve the right to exist undisturbed in their forest home. The journey back is arduous, particularly with Jennifer's injured leg, but we make steady progress. By sunset, we reach the North Ridge Trail, where I'm able to radio for emergency extraction. Within an hour, a rescue team arrives to transport the Chens to medical care. As they're loaded into the rescue vehicle, Madison's parents grasp my hands with surprising strength. Nobody will believe what happened to us, Jennifer says, her voice hoarse from days in the wilderness. They'll say we got lost, injured, confused. I know, I tell her. But I believe you. And I made a promise up there that I intend to keep. After the Chens depart, Kai and I are left staring into the darkening forest. the enormity of our discovery settling over us like a physical weight. What now? He asks. Now we find a way to stop that resort development without revealing what's really living in these mountains. And if we can't, I think about the leader's final message, the one-season timeline, the implied threat if we fail. Then we're going to have a much bigger problem than missing hikers. That night, as we camp at the ranger station before beginning our campaign to protect the Dark Hollows, I record everything in my personal journal, not the sanitized version that will appear in official reports, but the full, unvarnished truth of what we encountered. Future rangers will need this knowledge if they're to understand what watches from the ancient pines of Monongahela. What has always been watching, long before we arrived with our trails and cabins and development plans, what will continue watching long after we're gone. The wilderness has guardians older and more formidable than any human ranger. I merely serve alongside them, even if most of humanity will never know they exist. And as I write these final words, I swear I can hear them in the distance, not threatening but reminding. A long, mournful call that echoes across the valley, telling those who know how to listen, we are still here. We have always been here. This is our home too. The truth is out there in the whispers of the ancient pines. Whether you choose to believe it or not, I know what watches from the wilderness. And now, so do you. My name is Dakota, which means friend to everyone in Sioux. Ironic now, considering how I've come to fear the shadows beyond my cabin window. Before taking this job, I never imagined myself isolating in the remote wilderness of Olympic National Park. The dense primeval forests of Washington state held little appeal for a city kid who grew up surrounded by concrete and neon. But after hitting rock bottom with a failed business and a broken engagement, the Forest Service job posting seemed like a cosmic sign. Park Ranger Backcountry Division, Olympic National Park. Requires wilderness experience, first aid certification, and strong survival skills. I had precisely none of those qualifications, but desperation makes liars of us all. My interview with Regional Director Kavanaugh was a masterclass in creative biography. I fabricated camping trips, invented survival courses, and conjured a passion for wildlife conservation that existed only in my imagination. Whatever guilt I felt dissolved when her email arrived. Welcome to the Forest Service family. The email mentioned a 6-month assignment at Rainwater Station, a remote outpost nestled against Wapiti Lake, servicing the most isolated segment of the park. The station consisted of a rustic cabin, a small storage shed, and a dock extending into the cold, clear water. My duties would include trail maintenance, wildlife monitoring, and assisting lost hikers who ventured too far into the backcountry. You'll love it, assured Mason, the grizzled veteran ranger who drove me to the cabin on that first day. His weathered face creased into a smile beneath his gray beard. Nothing but trees, mountains, and sky for 30 miles in every direction. As we bumped along the dirt access road, I felt a mounting sense of dread. What had I gotten myself into? The dense forest pressed in from both sides, ancient trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. Mason must have noticed my expression. Don't worry. Most folks get spooked their first few weeks. The silence does things to your mind, makes you hear things that aren't there. What kind of things? I asked. Mason's eyes flickered toward me, then back to the road. Just things. Wind in the trees, animals moving around at night. But there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't telling me everything. The cabin appeared around a bend. A sturdy log structure with a metal roof and a covered porch. Solar panels glinted on the south-facing side, and a small satellite dish perched near the chimney. Beyond the cabin, Wapiti Lake stretched into the distance, its surface mirroring the surrounding mountains. Home sweet home, Mason announced, killing the engine. At least for the next 6 months. That night, after Mason left, I sat on the porch watching darkness swallow the forest. The immensity of the silence was overwhelming. No traffic noise, no hum of electricity, no distant conversations, just the occasional call of an owl and the soft lapping of water against the shore. I was unpacking my supplies when I found a leather-bound journal tucked between the guidebooks on the shelf. Opening it, I discovered it belonged to the previous ranger, Jenna Alvarez. Her neat handwriting filled dozens of pages with observations about wildlife, weather patterns, and trail conditions. But as I flipped through the journal, the entries took a strange turn. March 15, heard it again last night. That sound isn't a wolf or a bear. It's something else. Something watching the cabin. March 20, footprints by the Eastern Trail. Much too large for a human. Stride length impossible for any known animal in the region. March 28, It's getting closer. I've started keeping the shutters closed at night. The final entry was dated April 3rd, just 3 weeks before my arrival. It knows I'm alone here. I've requested transfer to another station. If anyone reads this, don't go into the forest after dark. And whatever you do, don't answer if something calls your name. A chill ran down my spine. I closed the journal and looked around the suddenly claustrophobic cabin. What had happened to Jenna? Mason hadn't mentioned anything about the previous ranger having problems. That's when I heard it. A long, low moan from somewhere in the forest. Not quite animal, not quite human. It rose and fell like a plaintive cry, echoing across the lake before fading into silence. I told myself it was just the wind, or a distant animal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was out there in the darkness, watching my cabin with patient, hungry eyes. 3 days later, I received my first emergency call. A family of hikers had veered off the main trail and become disoriented in the dense forest. According to their GPS coordinates, they were about 4 miles east of my position, in an area known as Whispering Ridge. The sun was already low in the sky as I packed my emergency gear. First aid kit, extra water, flashlights, emergency blankets. I'd have to hurry to reach them before nightfall. The thought of being in the forest after dark made my skin crawl, but I couldn't leave a family stranded overnight. As I hiked the narrow trail, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made me flinch. The dense canopy overhead blocked much of the fading light, casting the forest floor in deep shadow. I found the family, a couple with their teenage daughter, huddled near a fallen log. The father had twisted his ankle, and they'd been unable to continue. Their relief at seeing me was palpable. "Thank God," the mother said. "We thought we might have to spend the night out here." "We need to move quickly," I replied, helping the father to his feet. "It'll be dark soon." "We saw something," the daughter said suddenly. Her voice was hushed, her eyes wide. "While we were waiting, in the trees over there." I followed her gaze to a dense thicket about 50 yards away. "What did you see?" "It was tall, really tall. Standing on 2 legs, but not human." She shivered. "It was watching us." "Probably just a bear," I said with forced confidence. "They sometimes stand on their hind legs to get a better look." But I knew bears didn't stand and watch for extended periods. And they certainly didn't hide in thickets, observing with calculated interest. We started back toward the cabin, moving as quickly as the father's injury would allow. Darkness was falling rapidly now, the forest transforming into a maze of shadows and whispers. I kept my flashlight trained on the path ahead, trying not to think about what might be following us. We were about a mile from the cabin when I heard it. The same moaning call I'd heard that first night, but closer now, much closer. I froze, listening as it echoed through the trees. "What was that?" the mother whispered, clutching her daughter's arm. "Just the wind," I lied. "We need to keep moving." But as we resumed our trek, the calls continued, sometimes to our left, sometimes to our right. It was as if something was pacing us through the forest, always just out of sight. Then the daughter screamed. Following her pointing finger, I swept my flashlight toward a gap between 2 massive trees. For just a moment, the beam illuminated a figure, impossibly tall and broad, covered in dark hair, but it was the eyes that struck me. Reflective and intelligent, glowing with an amber light that wasn't just a reflection of my flashlight. The figure held my gaze for a heartbeat before melting back into the darkness. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing the daughter's hand. The father, adrenaline overriding his pain, supported his wife as we crashed through the underbrush. Behind us, something large moved through the forest with frightening speed. Branches snapped and leaves rustled as it pursued us, always just out of sight but drawing steadily closer. The lights of my cabin appeared through the trees, salvation just yards away. We burst from the forest edge and sprinted across the clearing, the presence behind us pausing at the tree line. I hustled the family inside, locking the door and pulling the shutters closed. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. "What was that thing?" the father demanded, his face pale. I had no answer for him. Or rather, I had an answer I wasn't ready to accept. That night, after using the satellite phone to arrange evacuation for the family the next morning, I returned to Jenna's journal, reading each entry with new understanding. Something was stalking these woods, something that wasn't supposed to exist. The locals had a name for it. A name passed down through generations of native tribes in the region. They called it Schalek, the Shadow Walker. Not just an animal, but a guardian of the forest with ancient intelligence and deadly purpose. As I sat in the darkened cabin, listening to the family's restless sleep in the adjacent room, I heard heavy footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps that made the wooden boards creak beneath tremendous weight. Then came the sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. A low, guttural voice from just outside the window, speaking my name. "Dakota," it whispered in the darkness. "Dakota, come outside." Morning came with blessed sunlight streaming through the windows, banishing the horrors of the night. I'd spent hours huddled in my chair, clutching a flashlight and a kitchen knife, listening to the thing on the porch circle the cabin. Occasionally it would stop at a window and tap gently on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. As if politely requesting entry. The family had slept through it all, exhausted from their ordeal. Now they sat at my kitchen table, sipping instant coffee and glancing nervously at the forest beyond the windows. "The evacuation helicopter should be here by noon," I told them, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "They'll take you directly back to the ranger station at Port Angeles. You should come with us," the mother said. Her eyes were red-rimmed from poor sleep, her hands trembling slightly around her mug. "After what we saw yesterday," I forced a smile. "It's my job to stay. Besides, it was probably just a bear." None of us believed that, but they didn't argue. I suspected they were simply grateful to be leaving. When the helicopter finally arrived, its rhythmic thumping a welcome intrusion on the forest silence, I found myself fighting the urge to climb aboard with them. Instead, I helped them with their gear and waved as the aircraft lifted above the treetops and disappeared over the ridge. The silence that followed was deafening. That afternoon, I hiked to the location where we'd encountered the creature. I told myself I was being rational, scientific, looking for tracks or other evidence. In reality, I was driven by a compulsive need to confirm what I'd seen, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. The forest was different in daylight, less menacing, more serene. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the moss-covered ground. Birds called to one another overhead, and occasionally a squirrel or chipmunk would dart across my path. At the spot where we'd seen the figure, I found what I was looking for, and what I was dreading. A set of footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. They were unmistakably humanoid in shape, but massive, at least 18 inches long and incredibly wide. The stride length between prints was over 4 feet, suggesting a creature of impossible height. I photographed the prints with my phone, then knelt to examine them more closely. The impression showed 5 toes, like a human foot, but with a different distribution of weight. Whatever had made these tracks walked differently than a person. As I studied the area, I noticed broken branches high above Minnie's 8 or 9 feet off the ground, where something large had pushed through the undergrowth. In several places, I found tufts of dark, coarse hair snagged on tree bark. I was collecting one of these samples when I heard a branch snap behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. The forest had gone silent. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just heavy, expectant silence. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. My voice echoed briefly before being swallowed by the trees. Nothing answered, but I could feel eyes on me, watching, calculating. I backed away slowly, then turned and walked as calmly as I could manage back toward the trail. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but some deeper knowledge told me that running would be a mistake. Whatever was watching me was a predator, and predators chase fleeing prey. That night, I called Mason on the satellite phone. I needed answers, and I suspected he knew more than he'd told me. "So you've seen it," he said after I described my encounter. There was no surprise in his voice, only resignation. "What is it, Mason?" I demanded. "And why the hell didn't you warn me?" He sighed heavily. "Would you have believed me if I'd told you there was a 9-foot-tall hairy hominid wandering around the forest? You could have tried. Look, we don't talk about it, all right? Official policy. Too many cranks and monster hunters would flood the park if word got out. So the Forest Service knows?" A long pause. "Let's just say there's an understanding. We don't bother it. It generally doesn't bother us." "Generally?" Another pause. "There have been incidents, mostly with people who disrespect the forest. Poachers, illegal loggers, people who stay too long in certain areas. What happened to Jenna, the ranger before me?" Mason's voice dropped. "She got too curious. Started leaving food out, trying to make contact. Thought she could communicate with it. A chill ran through me. And nothing. She requested a transfer, and we gave it to her. She's at Mount Rainier now." I wasn't sure I believed him. There was something in his voice, a hesitation, a careful choice of words. "Listen," Mason continued. "Just do your job and keep to yourself. It won't hurt you if you don't provoke it. It's watching my cabin at night, calling my name." Silence on the line. "Mason, that's not normal," he finally responded. They're usually more shy than that. There's more than one. A family group, we think. Been in these woods for generations. After ending the call, I sat in the darkening cabin, Mason's words echoing in my mind. A family group. Generations. The implications were staggering. As I pondered this, my satellite phone pinged with an incoming email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, jalvarez@personal.net. To Takoda Williams, from Jenna Alvarez. Subject, Rainwater Station. If you're reading this, you've seen it. I set this email to send automatically when someone accessed the emergency satellite system from the cabin. Don't trust what they tell you. There's more happening at Rainwater than they admit. Check the loose floorboard under the kitchen table. I left something there. Be careful. They're watching the cabin. Not just the creatures. Nennis, Jenna. I stared at the screen, a new fear blooming in my chest. What did she mean, not just the creatures? Who else was watching? Moving to the kitchen, I knelt and examined the floorboards beneath the table. One board shifted slightly under pressure. I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled it up. Inside the small cavity was a weatherproof case. Opening it, I found a thumb drive, a small notebook, and a baggie containing several dark hairs, similar to those I'd collected in the forest. The notebook contained Jenna's private observations, separate from the official journal on the shelf. Her handwriting became increasingly erratic with each entry. Found evidence today. Not just folklore or misidentified bears. Real, living hominids previously undocumented. Evolutionary offshoots. Relict population. Kay says to drop it. Claims we have an arrangement. What does that mean? Hair samples match nothing in genetic database. Closest approximation, 85% human, 15% unknown. They're intelligent, problem-solving, using tools, communicating with each other. This is the anthropological discovery of the century. Someone removed my trail cameras, not animals. The memory cards were taken, casings left behind. Who's interfering? The final pages detailed her plans to gather conclusive evidence before going public, followed by increasingly paranoid notes about being watched by someone from the service. I plugged a thumb drive into my laptop. It contained dozens of audio files, recordings from Jenna's trail cameras. With shaking hands, I clicked on one labeled midnight at encounter_3.mp3. At first, there was only forest ambience, wind in the trees, distant owl calls. Then came a series of rhythmic grunts and whoops, followed by wood knocking against wood, communicating. Most chilling was the final segment, something large moving near the microphone, breathing heavily. Then a voice, deep and guttural, but unmistakably forming words. Go. Away, human. I slammed the laptop closed, my heart pounding. They could speak, or at least mimic human speech. That night, the stalking around my cabin intensified. Not one but multiple sets of footsteps circled the structure. Occasionally they would stop, and I would hear soft vocalizations, a language of sorts, being spoken just outside my walls. Around 2 a.m. a new sound joined the nocturnal symphony, the distant hum of a vehicle engine. I peered through a crack in the shutters to see headlights moving along the access road, then stopping just before reaching the clearing. The lights extinguished, but I could hear car doors opening and closing. People. Here, in the middle of the night. I expected the creatures to flee from the human intrusion, but the footsteps around my cabin continued their patrol. If anything, they drew closer to the building, as if, protective. Through the window, I could make out flashlight beams moving through the trees near the edge of the clearing. Two figures in dark clothing emerging from the forest. They paused, scanning the area, then began approaching the cabin. A sudden cacophony erupted from the surrounding forest. Howls, screams, and wood knocking coming from all directions. The flashlight beams swung wildly as the figures froze. One of the dark shapes shouted something to the other, pointing urgently back toward the trees. They retreated rapidly, flashlights bobbing as they ran. Car doors slammed, an engine roared to life, and tires spun on dirt as the vehicle accelerated away. The forest sounds continued for several minutes after the vehicle departed, then gradually subsided. The footsteps resumed their circuit of my cabin, but they seemed less threatening now, almost reassuring. I didn't sleep that night. As dawn approached, I heard a final circuit of heavy footsteps, then silence as the creatures retreated into the forest. When morning came, I ventured outside, scanning the tree line nervously. In the dirt near my porch, I found a freshly killed rabbit, laid out deliberately where I would find it. A gift? A warning? I wasn't sure. On the access road, I found tire tracks, proof I hadn't imagined the nighttime visitors. Kneeling beside them, I noticed distinctive treads, government-issue tires, like those on Mason's truck. That afternoon, I hiked to the highest point in the area, where satellite reception was strongest. I called an old college friend who now worked for the biology department at the University of Washington. "Liv, I need a favor," I said when she answered. "It's important, and it needs to stay between us." "You sound terrible. What's going on?" "I'm sending you some photos and audio files. I need you to analyze them. Tell me what you're hearing and seeing." "What am I looking for?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Something, not human but close." 2 days later, Liv called back, her voice tight with excitement and disbelief. "Dakota, what the hell did you send me? Those vocalizations, they're structured, syntactic. It's language, not human but definitely language. And the hair samples, the DNA is, well, it's impossible. Primate, certainly. Some sequences match Homo sapiens, but others don't match anything in our databases. If I didn't know better, I'd say you found a new species of hominid, or an old one," I murmured. "What? Nothing. What about the footprints? Based on the measurements and photos, whatever made those tracks would stand between 8 and 10 feet tall. The weight distribution suggests habitual bipedalism, but different muscle attachments than modern humans." I thanked her and made her promise again to keep this confidential. As I ended the call, I noticed a dark figure watching from the tree line far below, standing upright, perfectly still. When I looked again, it was gone. That night, I left my shutters open, a single lamp burning on my table. I placed a bowl of fruit on my porch, an offering, a gesture of peace. From the darkness beyond my window came that now familiar voice. "Dakota, why stay?" I approached the window slowly. "This is my post," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Danger," the voice replied after a pause. "Not from us." "Who then?" But there was no answer, just the soft sound of retreating footsteps. In the morning, the fruit was gone. In its place was a small stone carving, crude but recognizable as a human figure with a star on its chest, a ranger's badge, a warning, and pinned beneath it a scrap of paper torn from a Forest Service notepad. Written in familiar handwriting, Mason's handwriting. "Monthly inspection. 15th. Extraction if necessary." Today was the 12th. I had 3 days to decide what to do. I spent the next day combing through Jenna's notes, photographs, and audio recordings. The picture that emerged was disturbing yet fascinating. The creatures, Stalek as the local tribes called them, had coexisted with humans in these forests for thousands of years. Mostly reclusive, they retreated deeper into the wilderness as human settlements expanded. According to the tribal histories Jenna had collected, the Stalek weren't just animals. They were intelligent beings with their own culture, language, and social structures. They were guardians of the forest, protectors of the natural balance. Most significantly, they had an arrangement with certain humans, an understanding born of mutual respect. They would remain hidden, and those who knew of them would protect their secret. But why? Why the official silence? Why would the Forest Service cover up the existence of what would be the greatest zoological discovery of the century? The answer came to me as I reviewed Jenna's final notes. It wasn't about protecting the public from knowledge of the creatures. It was about protecting the creatures from the public, and from something far worse. Jenna had mapped unusual patterns of land purchases around the national park. Shell companies acquiring large tracts of forest, mining permits being quietly approved, geological surveys focusing on specific regions that, according to her observations, contained the highest concentration of Stalek activity. Something valuable lay beneath the forest floor. Something worth millions, perhaps billions, and the only thing standing in the way of its extraction was the continued designation of the land as protected wilderness. If proof of an undiscovered hominid species emerged, the conservation battle would be over before it began. No company would be permitted to destroy the habitat of such a monumental discovery, unless, of course, no such discovery was ever announced. I sat back, my mind racing. If I was right, then the arrangement Mason had mentioned wasn't between the Forest Service and the Stalek. It was between the Forest Service and whoever wanted the land. Keep the creatures hidden. Discredit anyone who claimed to have seen them. Maintain the fiction that Bigfoot was just a myth, a campfire story. My satellite phone rang, startling me. "Mason's number, routine check-in," he said when I answered. "Everything quiet up there?" "Quiet enough," I replied, trying to sound casual. "When did you say you'd be coming by for inspection?" A slight pause. "The 15th. Day after tomorrow. Just standard procedure. Looking forward to it." After ending the call, I packed quickly. Essential supplies, Jenna's evidence, my own notes and photographs. I couldn't stay at the cabin. Whatever extraction meant, I doubted it involved just removing me from my post. As dusk fell, I shouldered my backpack and locked the cabin behind me. If I hiked through the night, I could reach the main access road by morning, then follow it to the highway. But as I entered the tree line, a massive shape stepped into my path. It stood over 8 feet tall, its broad shoulders and powerful frame covered in dark hair. In the fading light, I could make out its face, a blend of ape and human features, with a heavy brow and deep-set eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. I froze, my body trembling. Despite everything I'd learned, despite my growing suspicions about who the real threat was, coming face to face with the creature sent primal fear coursing through me. It made no move to approach, simply watching me with those ancient eyes. "I'm leaving," I managed to say. "I won't tell anyone about you." The creature tilted its massive head. "Others. Coming. I know. Tomorrow. That's why I need to go now." It shook its head slowly. "Not safe. Road watched." My heart sank. If they were monitoring the roads, I'd never make it out. The creature gestured deeper into the forest. "Come." I hesitated. Following this being into the darkening woods went against every instinct for self-preservation. Yet somehow, I trusted it more than I trusted Mason or anyone else from the Forest Service right now. "Where?" "Safe place. Old place." Decision made. I nodded and followed as it turned and moved into the forest. Despite its size, it navigated the dense undergrowth with surprising grace, making less noise than I did. We traveled for hours through the darkness, the creature occasionally pausing to listen or to make soft vocalizations that were answered from the surrounding forest. We were being escorted, I realized, by unseen guardians moving parallel to our path. Just before dawn, we reached a sheer rock face rising from the forest floor. The creature led me to what appeared to be a solid wall of stone, then reached into a crevice and pulled. A section of rock, actually a cleverly disguised door made of wood and stone, swung open. Beyond was a cave, its entrance hidden by the false rock face. The creature ducked inside, gesturing for me to follow. The cave opened into a large chamber illuminated by shafts of light from small openings in the ceiling. As my eyes adjusted, I gasped. The walls were covered with paintings, ancient pictographs depicting human and stoic figures coexisting, hunting together, sharing knowledge, defending the forest from invaders. More surprising were the artifacts scattered throughout the space. Stone tools, yes, but also items of obvious human manufacture. Old metal cooking pots, tattered blankets, books with decaying leather bindings. My guide watched me take it all in, then moved to a small alcove, and returned with something that made my breath catch. A ranger's badge, tarnished with age. "Friend," it said, holding up the badge. "Long ago." I understood then. This wasn't the first time the Stashulek had formed an alliance with a human guardian. Throughout history, certain individuals had been trusted with their secret, had helped protect them. "Why show me this?" I asked. The creature's expression was difficult to read, but its eyes held something like sorrow. "Landsick, mendig, poison water." It gestured to its chest. "Few remain." It led me deeper into the cave system, through tunnels that eventually opened into another chamber. Here, a small group of Stachulek gathered, perhaps a dozen individuals of varying sizes. Some appeared old, their hair streaked with gray. 2 females cradled infants against their chests. Among the last of their kind, I realized, pushed to the brink by human encroachment, by the steady destruction of their habitat. One of the older creatures approached, carrying a weathered leather satchel. It held the bag out to me. Inside was a journal dated 1937, the handwriting faded but legible. "Today I made contact with the beings the natives call Stalek. After months of leaving gifts and gaining their trust, they have finally revealed themselves to me. They are not animals, as some believe, but intelligent creatures with their own language and customs. The logging operations push ever closer to their territory. The tribal elders have entrusted me with their greatest secret, the existence of these forest people, in hopes that as a government man, I might help protect them. God forgive me, I have reported nothing to my superiors. To do so would bring scientists, hunters, and curiosity seekers swarming into these woods. Instead, I have marked certain areas as hazardous on official maps, steering development away from their core habitat. This deception weighs heavily on my conscience, yet I cannot bear the thought of these gentle beings being captured or killed in the name of progress. The journal continued, detailing decades of secret cooperation between this ranger and the Stalek. He had helped them adapt as the world changed around them, brought them medical supplies during outbreaks of human diseases, and most importantly, kept their existence hidden from those who would exploit or harm them. The final entry was dated 1976. My time grows short. The cancer spreads quickly now. I have done what I can for my friends, but I fear for their future. The protected lands shrink each year as lumber and mining interests press their claims. I pass this journal to them in hopes that someday someone worthy will find it and continue what I have started. Someone who sees beyond fear and curiosity to the deeper truth that we are not the only thinking beings on this earth, and we have no right to claim it all for ourselves. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The older Stjalek watched me intently, as if trying to gauge my reaction, to determine if I was worthy of the trust placed in me. "The men who come tomorrow," I said slowly. "They know about you?" The creature nodded. "Some know. Hunt us. Take land." I thought of the geological surveys in Jenna's notes, the pattern of land acquisitions. "There's something valuable under the forest, isn't there? Something they want to mine." Again a nod. "Black stone, burns, coal. Of course." The Olympic Peninsula had untapped coal reserves worth billions. If the land lost its protected status, if it was opened for resource development, how can I help? I asked. The oldest Stjalek approached me, laying a massive hand gently on my shoulder. Despite its size and strength, the touch was delicate, careful. "Show truth," it said simply, "to world." Jenna had tried that, I realized. She'd gathered evidence, planned to reveal everything, and they'd stopped her somehow. Silenced her or threatened her into compliance. But Jenna had worked alone. I didn't have to. I thought of Liv at the university, of the journalist friends I still had from my previous life. The world had changed since the old Ranger's time. Information could spread globally in seconds, becoming impossible to suppress once released. I made my decision. "I'll need to use the satellite phone from my cabin. Can you get me back there without being seen?" The creatures exchanged looks, then the one who had guided me nodded. "Nighttime. We help." We spent the day planning. I would return to the cabin after dark, use the satellite connection to upload everything, Jenna's evidence, my own documentation, the journal, to multiple secure locations. Then I would hike out before Mason and whoever came with him arrived the next day. The Stjalek knew the forest better than any human. They would guide me through paths too rugged for vehicles, avoiding the roads entirely until I reached the highway far from the main entrance. As night fell, we made our way back toward the cabin. 4 Stjalek accompanied me, moving like shadows through the forest. Despite their size, they navigated the darkness with uncanny precision, steering me around obstacles I couldn't even see. We were less than a mile from the clearing when one of them froze, raising a hand for silence. It tilted its head, listening, then made a soft warning sound to the others. "Men," it whispered to me. "At your home." They'd come early. Mason must have suspected something from our conversation. One of the creatures gestured for me to follow, leading our group in a wide arc around the cabin. From a vantage point on higher ground, I could see vehicles parked in the clearing, not just Mason's truck, but 2 black SUVs with government plates. Flashlight beams swept the forest edge as armed men established a perimeter around the cabin. This wasn't a routine inspection, it was an operation. I watched as Mason emerged from my cabin, speaking into a radio. Even from this distance, his frustration was evident in his body language. They'd expected to find me there. My Stjalek guide touched my arm gently, then pointed to the west, an alternate route. I nodded, following as we retreated silently into the forest. Dawn found us at the edge of the park, overlooking a 2-lane highway that wound through the valley below. My guides would go no further. This close to civilization, the risk of being seen was too great. The eldest Stjalek approached me one last time. From around its neck, it removed a small leather pouch, suspended on a cord, and placed it in my hand. Inside was a carved stone pendant in the shape of a stylized face, half human, half Stjalek. A symbol of connection, of shared guardianship. "Remember," it said, its deep voice rumbling softly. "Not alone. Forest watches." Then they were gone, melting into the trees with barely a sound, leaving me to make my way down to the highway. 3 weeks later, I sat in Liv's university office, watching as she examined the final DNA sequencing results. "It's revolutionary," she said, her voice hushed with awe. "A previously unknown hominid species, showing evolutionary divergence from Homo sapiens approximately 250,000 years ago. Yet, with clear evidence of ongoing adaptation to changing environments." The evidence was undeniable. Between Jenna's documentation, my own recordings and photographs, the 1937 journal, and most importantly, the DNA analysis, we had proof of exactly what the mining interests feared most, an endangered intelligent species whose habitat must be protected at all costs. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Another major outlet had picked up the story. The revelations had exploded across both scientific publications and mainstream media, too widespread to be contained or discredited. Congressional hearings had been announced to investigate the apparent conspiracy within certain branches of the Forest Service. Mason and several higher-ranking officials had been suspended pending investigation. Most importantly, an emergency conservation order had been issued, expanding the protected status of the Olympic Peninsula forests and permanently barring any resource extraction activities. I touched the stone pendant I now wore around my neck. The Stjalik would remain hidden, continuing their ancient way of life in the deep forests, but now they would do so under the umbrella of official protection, their existence acknowledged in scientific literature if not in the public imagination. My phone rang. Another journalist seeking comment. I let it go to voicemail. I'd said everything I needed to say in the comprehensive documentation we'd released. Tomorrow, I would return to the park, not as a ranger, that career was certainly over, but as something the old journal keeper would have understood. A friend, a guardian, a keeper of ancient promises. As dusk fell outside Liv's office window, I thought I glimpsed a tall figure watching from the edge of the campus woods. When I looked again, it was gone, but I knew I wasn't alone. I never would be again. The forest was watching, and in the deepening shadows of wild places across the continent, the Stjalik continued their silent vigil, guardians of secrets far older than human memory. I touched the pendant once more, feeling its contours beneath my fingers, the face that was half human, half other, not so different after all. Darkness was falling quickly over the remote stretch of Arizona wilderness as I made my way through the thick underbrush. The air grew colder by the minute, my heavy pack weighing me down with each step. Private Dakota Coda Black Hawk of the U.S. Army Rangers, on special assignment. That was me, only 22 years old, shipped out here on a need-to-know solo recon mission. Command said the details were classified, but I knew something strange was going on out in these woods. People disappearing without a trace. Unidentified creatures glimpsed between the trees. An eerie silence hanging over everything. I didn't put much stock in ghost stories, but I'd heard the murmurs back on base, same as everyone else. Old native legends of shape-shifting beasts and vengeful spirits roaming this land. Growing up on the reservation, my grandfather used to tell tales of such things by the flickering light of the campfire, his weathered face grave and voice lowered to a hush. Folktales and superstitions, I always thought. The fanciful imaginings of a traditional society, nothing more. But out here, enveloped by the darkening forest, those childhood stories came rushing back with a chill. A raven cawed ominously from the treetops, making me flinch. Get it together, Blackhawk. You're a ranger, not some green private jumping at shadows. I consulted my map and compass, trying to get my bearings. Only a few more clicks to the rendezvous point, an old trapper's cabin where I was to make camp for the night. The crunch of my boots against the dry leaves sounded unnaturally loud. It was too quiet otherwise, no birdsong or insect buzz, even the wind seeming to still, like the whole forest was collectively holding its breath. A twig snapped somewhere off to my left and I froze, slowly reaching for my sidearm. I listened hard but heard nothing else. Probably just a deer, but my gut insisted otherwise. I couldn't shake the uncanny feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and a cold sweat gathered between my shoulder blades despite the chill in the air. I knew all too well the subtle signs of my native intuition telling me something was wrong. Warily, I continued on, my senses on high alert and my finger resting on the trigger. The light was fading fast now, an inky blackness gathering between the trees. My night vision goggles cast everything in an eerie green glow as I switched them on. I tried hard not to think about the old tribal stories of what was said to roam the forest after dark. Children's tales, I told myself firmly. Just the product of overactive imaginations. Then I heard it, Mana's long, low, moaning cry that echoed through the woods and made my blood turn to ice in my veins. It sounded like no animal I knew nor any human voice. The wailing rose in pitch and volume until it was a deafening shriek of fury and despair, paralyzing me with dread. A huge dark shape suddenly loomed up in my enhanced vision, moving between the trees with impossible speed. It was immense and furry, shuffling along on two legs, yet like no bear or primate. The creature let loose another soul-piercing howl, and its glowing red eyes fixed right on me as it started crashing in my direction. Blind panic seized me. Protocol and training forgotten, I turned and ran, tearing wildly through the undergrowth as fast as my shaking legs would carry me. The thing gave chase, its heavy footfalls and enraged screams growing closer and closer no matter how I fled. I careened down a steep embankment, lost my footing, and tumbled head over heels into a ravine below. The world spun crazily, then went black as my head cracked against a rock. The last thing I heard before the void took me was the creature's demonic baying right above, triumphant and blood-chilling. Some buried part of my mind recognized the sound before I passed out completely. It was the war cry of the Mogollon monster. The legendary Bigfoot of my grandfather's tales had found me at last. Consciousness returned slowly, fragmented sensations and hazy flashes penetrating the darkness behind my eyelids. A throbbing pain in my temples, the cold hardness of stone beneath me, damp, musty air and the steady drip of water. Where was I? What happened? Disjointed images flickered through the shadowlands of near awareness, running through darkened woods, a hulking shape in pursuit, falling endlessly into blackness. With a gasp I jolted awake, clammy sweat coating my face and neck. My eyes snapped open only to be confronted with more darkness, an oppressive, absolute black beyond the dancing spots in my vision. A bolt of fear electrified my spine as I remembered the horrifying last moments before I'd blacked out. The creature's glowing red eyes burning into me, its screaming fury ringing in my ears as I fled for my life. Oh God, the Mogollon monster. Grandfather's stories had been true all along, and now I was its prisoner, dragged down here to this black pit to meet some grisly fate. Hyperventilating, I groped out with shaking hands, feeling damp stone and packed earth on all sides, a low ceiling of rock scraping my questing fingertips. I was underground, in some kind of cave. As my eyes adjusted, I could just make out dim shafts of moonlight filtering down from cracks and fissures in the chilly stone above. The silvery beams illuminated a small chamber, its natural granite walls glistening with eons of mineral accretion. I was alone, the creature nowhere in sight, but a scattering of yellowed bones in one corner made my gorge rise. I had no illusions about what had left them behind. I took stock of my situation, forcing my speeding heart to slow. To my amazement, I was still alive and in one piece, not counting the goose egg on my skull and various cuts and abrasions from my fall. The creature must have dragged me here while I was unconscious. But why? To save me for a later meal? I tried not to dwell on the grim possibilities. Years of ranger training kicked in as I focused on the immediate priorities of survival and escape. My weapons and gear were gone, no doubt lost in my panicked flight through the forest, but I still had my wits and my skills. Like my native ancestors, I would need to rely on them to get out of this. Gingerly, I climbed to my feet, feeling the cave walls for anything that could serve as a tool or weapon. A wave of dizziness nearly toppled me and I squeezed my eyes shut, breathing deeply until it passed. Probable concussion. Another mark in the not good column. It was only then I noticed the glint of something metallic on the ground, almost hidden in the gloom. Dog tags, 2 sets by the look of it. I scooped them up with fumbling fingers and angled them into the weak light. The names stamped into the stainless steel plates made my heart seize anew. Stevenson, Daniel R. and Begay, Joseph T., 2 fellow rangers from my company, both listed as AWOL after failing to return from patrols in this area over recent months. Command had refused to send search parties or even acknowledge their disappearance, and now I knew why. Their remains lay here in this cave, a shared tomb where the monster had dragged them to die. Cold fury joined the fear knotting my gut. Whatever was going on here, my superiors knew something about it. Maybe they'd even sent me in as bait, to draw out the creature they dared not admit existed, expendable, like Stevenson and Begay had been. The realization made me feel more alone than ever, but I'd be damned if I'd go out like them without a fight. I was Private Dakota Blackhawk, proud descendant of the Navajo Code Talkers. I would face this evil like a warrior and live to tell the tale, to honor my lost brothers in arms, or die trying. Tucking the dog tags into my breast pocket over my heart, I turned to the tunnel entrance on the far side of the cave. No telling where it led, but anything was better than waiting for the creature's return. On silent feet, I crept into the cold stone passageway, following the elusive fingers of moonlight as they beckoned me on into the unknown. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a serpentine blackness writhing through the bowels of the earth. I measured time only by my own ragged breathing and the metronome drip of water from somewhere far ahead. The musty air grew heavier, danker, the further I traveled from the cave. If I'd had any lingering doubts, this was the monster's lair. The increasingly foul stench that rode the sluggish currents dispelled them. Still, I pressed on, keeping one hand trailing along the damp, pebbled wall, the other held out before me. My eyes had adjusted about as much as they were going to, picking out deeper blots of shadow in the all-consuming darkness. More side tunnels branched off here and there, but I stuck to the wider main passage, reckoning it had to come out somewhere. Time seemed to lose all meaning in this timeless abyss, my senses winnowing down to the drip of water, the rasp of my breath, the throb of my pulse in my ears. Almost a meditative state, my awareness floating free of my body. Some distant part of me recognized it as a mild dissociation, a stress response, but I let it lull me as my feet carried me onward. The Diné, my mother's people, believed the underground world was a place of sacred mystery where a man might confront visions and spirits. I wondered bleakly what I might find down here, cut off from sun, sky, and stars. Gradually, I became aware of a subtle downward slope in the path, the tunnel angling deeper into the mountain's roots. The air grew even closer, stalactites of limestone reaching down from the dripping ceiling to brush my ducked head. I shivered, my sweat-dampened uniform no match for the deepening chill. It had to be near freezing down here, or perhaps it was just my growing sense of dread that set my teeth chattering. Just as I was beginning to despair of ever finding my way out, the tunnel terminated abruptly in a small chamber. Unlike the natural cave I'd woken in, this space had the look of something carved by design. Squared-off walls rose to a shallow domed ceiling, faint lines and geometries etched into their granite faces. In the center of the floor, a perfectly circular hole gaped like the mouth of a great stone well. A spectral glow seeped up from its depths, painting everything in washes of ice-pale light. Heart pounding anew, I approached the edge and risked a glance down. The shaft was perfectly vertical, plunging down farther than I could see. That eerie light seemed to emanate up from the very depths of the earth, ancient and eldritch. A vague sense of movement in the glow made me squint, trying to resolve the shape, and with dawning horror I realized I was looking at water. An underground lake, or river, its obsidian surface a glimmer with some kind of bioluminescence, and something vast was moving down there in the black waters. Dimly I could make out an immense shadowy shape, pulsing and undulating as it swam through the sunken depths. Even at this distance I could feel the uncanny weight of its presence, like the deep thrumming note of a colossal bell resonating in my very bones. I scrambled back from the edge, chest heaving, certain I'd just glimpsed something not meant for mortal eyes. Some eldritch, primordial thing that had haunted this region since long before the Diné or any other tribe had walked the earth. The thought of the Mogollon monster being merely its servant, an extension of its incomprehensible will, sent a new shudder of all-consuming dread through me. I knew with terrible certainty that if I fell into that abyss, I would be swept down to face the nightmare that lurked in the black. Then from behind me came the sound I'd been dreading. The heavy shuffling footfalls and graveyard stink of something huge entering the chamber. I spun to see the monster itself filling the passageway, its shaggy silhouette blotting out any exit. Dimly glowing eyes, the color of blood and madness, fixed on me as it reared up to its full height, nearly scraping the domed ceiling. My heart threatened to hammer out of my chest as the horrid creature shuffled forward, backing me toward the ledge with implacable purpose. I couldn't tear my gaze away from its ghastly face, all bared fangs and matted fur, and those hellish eyes boring into me. Its limbs were thick and rangy, tipped with scythe claws that could disembowel with a single swipe. I knew in that moment that it intended to seize me, to cast me into the depths and the clutches of the nameless thing that lurked below. Maybe it needed a living sacrifice to pay tribute to its eldritch master. Fear unlike anything I'd ever known flooded my veins with ice as the monster loomed over me, close enough for its putrid breath to wash over my face. But beneath it, something else stirred, the embers of a warrior's defiance, my ancestors' courage in the face of hopeless odds. I refused to meet this fate on my knees, meekly consigned to the abyss. "Come on, you bastard," I snarled up at the creature, fists clenched, feet planted wide apart. "You want me? Come and get me." With a blood-curdling roar, the Mogollon monster lunged and the world exploded into violence and chaos. The creature moved with a speed that belied its hulking mass, crossing the chamber in a single bound. I had only an instant to throw myself aside before a huge furred hand swiped through the space where I'd stood. Jagged claws raked the stone, striking sparks, the near miss raising the hair on my arms. I hit the ground in a combat roll, thanking God and the army for endless hours drilling hand to hand. I sprang back to my feet as the monster wheeled, bloody eyes incandescent with rage at being denied its prey. It charged again, a runaway locomotive of matted fur and muscle, and again I dove and tumbled clear by a hair's breadth. This time one of its claws snagged my uniform, tearing a long gash down the back of my jacket. First blood to the Mogollon, but better than losing a kidney. We squared off across the chamber. The monster's bulk interposed between me and the exit tunnel. Getting past it would be suicide. The only routes left were the ledge and the abyss it ringed. Two equally sure dooms, but the creature clearly meant to force me to the latter. Time to flip the script. "That all you got?" I taunted, bouncing on my heels, fists at the ready. "My little sister hits harder than you, ugly." I was trying to provoke it into a full frontal charge where its superior size would work against it. If I could get it to overextend, there was a chance, just a chance, I could use its own momentum to send it over the edge instead of me. Dangerous plan, dancing on the lip of a monster-haunted pit, but the alternatives were a damn sight grimmer. The creature fell for it, roaring its outrage as it barreled straight at me. I held my ground to the last possible second, heart in my throat, then feinted aside and struck, throwing my whole weight into its flank. I shoved with all my strength, trying to overbalance it. For a sickening heartbeat, I thought it wouldn't be enough, that its sheer mass would bowl me over and carry us both into the abyss. But at the critical moment, the monster's forward momentum took over. Arms windmilling almost comically, it staggered sideways, clawed feet scrabbling at the crumbling lip of the shaft. A huge chunk of stone gave way, and with a final piercing shriek, the Mogollon monster toppled over the edge. I caught a last glimpse of its contorted face, more human than animal in its fury and fear, before the darkness swallowed it whole. The creature's wail dopplered down into the bottomless depths, seeming to go on until at last it faded away entirely. An eternal moment of silence followed, like the whole world holding its breath. Then a distant splash, and the shaft erupted in a geyser of black water and eldritch light. I scrambled back as a seething column of water shot up from the abyss, shattering on the chamber's domed ceiling. For a terrifying instant I thought the whole cavern would collapse, drowning me in icy spray and rubble. But the stone held, and the geyser gradually subsided, sinking back into the depths from whence it came. In its wake, the chamber was still and silent as a tomb once more. Of the Mogollon monster there was no sign. Maybe the thing in the depths had claimed it, dragging it down to whatever nightmare realm it called home. Or maybe the impact of that long fall had simply shattered its bones, leaving it to sink lifeless into the black waters. I supposed I'd never know for sure. Letting out a shuddering breath, I slumped back against the chamber wall, my knees giving way as the adrenaline fled my system. I'd faced the creature and lived, if only by the skin of my teeth. But in the aftermath, a sick realization settled in my already churning gut. I was still trapped down here, miles underground, in a hypogeal maze no living man had mapped, with no gear, no food, and only the guttering luminance of the shaft to see by. I allowed myself a moment to feel the weight of despair, the immense loneliness of my predicament. What I wouldn't have given in that moment for another human voice, a friendly face, or even the rasp of a radio connecting me to the world above. Hard to believe that only this morning I'd been bitching to myself about another solo assignment, chafing at the long stretches of silence broken only by check-ins with command. Now I'd have killed for even that tenuous link to my fellow man. But as grandfather used to say, feeling sorry for yourself never put meat in the pot. I was a Black Hawk, a warrior, and I'd been in tight spots before, if never this tight. With a groan I pushed off the wall and got my feet back under me. The world spun for a few sickening seconds, but I locked my knees and waited it out. Dehydration and low blood sugar, most likely. I'd been down here the better part of a day, and the human body had its limits. First things first, take stock and prioritize. My stomach felt like my throat had been cut, but thirst would kill me a lot quicker than hunger. I needed to find water, the sooner the better. The subterranean river at the bottom of the shaft was out, even if I could have reached it. Too much risk of contamination from whatever the hell else was swimming around down there. But the guttering blue light that emanated from the abyss caught my eye again. It had a spectral beauty that sent chills down my spine, but I couldn't deny there was something almost hypnotic about its glow. And where there was light, there might be other things, life-sustaining things, lichens, mosses, fungi. A lot of subterranean life forms were bioluminescent, their eerie radiance a side effect of metabolic processes that extracted energy from minerals in the rock itself. And where there was one living thing, there might be others. Insects, arthropods, maybe even cavefish in stagnant pools, all potential food sources to a desperate man. It was 1,000 to 1 shot, but it beats starving to death in the dark. I'd follow that glow, let it be my guiding star through this midnight labyrinth. With any luck, I'd come across an underground spring to slake my thirst, and if I could catch and eat some of the local wildlife, it would keep me going that much longer. Long enough to find another way up and out. Squaring my shoulders with newfound resolve, I struck off down a branching passageway that seemed to parallel the abyss, keeping that eldritch light always in my peripheral vision. At least I wouldn't be staggering blind down here. Every journey started with a single step, grandfather used to say. Time to see where this one led. Time lost all meaning in the wandering dark. Without sun or stars to mark its passage, I measured it only by the slow, incremental changes in my body, the sandpaper rasp of my tongue turning to leather in my mouth, the hollow clench of my stomach devouring itself bite by bite, the deep, grinding ache in my joints and temples, dehydration taking its toll in countless small cruelties. I'd long since shed my torn jacket, the cave's chill a welcome respite from the sweat-soaked clamminess of my fatigues. Now the cool air laved my skin like a balm, though I knew it was stealing precious warmth from my core with every step, a deadly trap to imagine the cold as a comfort. Keep moving, or I'd lie down and never get up again. The eldritch glow ebbed and pulsed in the corner of my eye as I followed the meandering tunnel, as if the abyss had its own slow, cold heartbeat. Or maybe it was just my vision blurring at the edges, my brain misfiring as it gnawed on the last dregs of my body's reserves. In this bone-deep darkness, it was hard to tell the difference between hallucination and reality. I was starting to understand how a man could go mad down here, entombed alive with only the drip of water and the scurrying of unseen things for company. More than once I caught myself straining my ears for the tread of my pursuer, the Mogollon monster's guttural breath sounding in the cave's throat. Phantom echoes of a threat my addled brain couldn't accept was gone, and beneath it all, that deep, atavistic dread of the thing lurking at the bottom of the abyss. I tried not to think about what it might be, what ancient and inhuman appetites could conjure a bioluminescent glow to lure prey into the depths. Ranger school hadn't exactly covered the care and feeding of eldritch abominations. As if conjured by my thoughts, a flicker of movement up ahead snared my eye, there and gone again between one blink and the next. I froze, heart suddenly trip-hammering as I squinted into the gloom. At first I saw only stone, the eternal cathedral hush of the cavern, and then, a rippling at the corner of my vision, something pale and sinuous, pulsing along the wall like a vein of living mercury. Biting down on a yelp, I edged closer, fighting the urge to flee blindly back the way I'd come. I was a scientist's son as well as a warrior, and that curious spark, however faint, refused to be doused by fear. As I drew near, the mercurial shape resolved into a long, ropey strand of something clinging to the pitted limestone. It undulated gently, faint internal pulses traveling along its length in peristaltic waves. Mycelium, some distant part of my brain, offered up. The vegetative body of a fungus, a fibrous network that wound its way through the soil and stone. Only this was like no mushroom I'd ever seen. Where a normal mycelium would be a ghostly white, this one glowed the same glacial blue as the abyss, threads and hyphae picked out in blazing detail against the dark. The effect was strangely beautiful, reminding me of electron micrographs of neurons, all crisscrossing dendrites and axon terminals limned in frozen fire. As I stared in rapt fascination, the mycelial net seemed to stir, its fibers twining and weaving in intricate patterns that hinted at a deeper order, an alien geometry of form and function far beyond my understanding. I tried to follow the logic of its intersections and branchings, the way it pulsed in queer, arrhythmic tempo, as if to the beat of an unheard drummer. A chill rippled down my spine as I realized it almost seemed to be reacting to my presence, its movements quickening as I leaned in for a closer look. Somewhere in the back of my mind, alarm bells were going off, warning me to keep my distance. But that small, sane voice was drowned out by a rising tide of awe and hunger, a bone-deep need to understand this new piece of the puzzle my world had become. What strange evolutionary pressures could have produced such a thing? A fungal subroutine in the planet's source code. And what role did it play in the greater ecology of this misty and mephitic underworld, its glowing tendrils woven into the fabric of the abyss itself? Questions swirled through me, each spawning new and more perplexing ones that clamored for ascendance. How did it propagate in lightless depths? What manner of eerie symbiosis had it struck with the other denizens of the dark? Could it perhaps even be the source of the monster's unnatural strength and vitality, sporing its tissues with preternatural hardiness? The implications set my mind alight, exhausted neurons sparking with dreadful possibility. Almost without thinking, I slowly extended a hand, gloved fingers hovering scant centimeters from the glowing strands. I needed to feel their texture, to know if they were as insubstantial as they appeared or thrumming with hidden life. The glow seemed to intensify as I reached out, pulsing with renewed vigor, the air between suddenly electric with charge. Gah! I snatched my hand back as if burned, though I'd felt nothing more than a mild tingle. Heart pounding, I watched as the mycelium rippled and danced, its movements almost agitated now. Stupid, Coda. Stupid, foolish, and reckless, poking at unknown organisms like a kid with a stick. I hadn't survived everything this place had thrown at me just to fall victim to some funky fungal infection, if it even was a fungus at all. Cradling my hand against my chest, I backed away, putting a healthy distance between myself and the maybe mycelium. The scientific part of me still itched to investigate further, to suss out the biophysical mechanisms behind its eerie bioluminescence, but the wiser part had had enough brushes with subterranean strangeness for one lifetime. It was past time I got back to the mission at hand, getting my ass out of this hole in one piece. Carrying my gaze away from the hypnotic blue glow, I oriented myself by the faint draft sighing through the tunnels, and struck out in what I hoped was the direction of fresher air. With every step, I tried to shake the uncanny sense of the mycelium watching me go. An alien intelligence without eyes or mind, yet somehow aware in a way I could barely comprehend. But it was just a mushroom, I told myself firmly. A weird one, no doubt, but still just a brainless scrap of vegetable matter, nothing more. And if I walked a little faster despite the stitch in my side, if I found my eyes straying back over my shoulder, seeking out phantom movement in the gloom, well, it had been a hell of a long day. The sooner I put this whole benighted cave system behind me, the sooner I could collapse into my rack and commence repressing everything I'd seen down here. One foot in front of the other. Follow the air. Don't think about impossible life or eldritch mysteries or the yawning void that hungered beneath. There would be plenty of time to gibber about all that once I reached the surface. For now, the only thing that mattered was the mission. Get out, get back, make my report. Let command sort out the rest, and maybe see about getting a stiff drink or six. God knew I'd earned it. The tunnel ran on, an endless stone gullet swallowing me whole. My world narrowed to the throb of blood in my temples, the ragged saw of my breath, the jolt of each footfall up my aching legs. I tried to distract myself by dredging up half-forgotten bits of ranger wisdom, survival mantras, and snippets of cadence to keep my mind off the long, uncertain miles ahead. But Grandpa's favorites soon drowned them out. The old DNA chants and hero tales he'd tried to drum into my head over long summer nights on the res. Remember, Coda, his voice seemed to rumble in my ear, deeper and older than the stones themselves. The stories tell us the hero twins descended into the underworld to slay the monsters there, armed only with their wits and medicine. They faced trials and temptations, but in the end their courage prevailed. You are made of the same stuff, grandson. The blood of heroes flows through your veins, delirious ramblings of an overclocked brain, but they brought a thin smile to my cracked lips. Damned if the old man wasn't right. I'd faced down the Mogollon monster and lived to tell the tale. If the twins could beat back the primordial threats of the fourth world, what was one measly cave to a modern warrior like me? Though I wouldn't have said no to a bellow and some lightning arrows right about now, I shook myself, trying to clear the looping, increasingly nonsensical thoughts from my head. Dehydration was clearly taking its toll, eroding my faculties like water over sandstone. If I didn't get some liquid into me soon, I'd be seeing visions to make peyote trips seem tame by comparison. Already the eldritch glow bleeding through the cracks seemed to writhe and twist into maddeningly intricate patterns, as if a nest of phosphorescent snakes lurked just behind the they. Wait, not snakes. Roots. I stumbled to a halt, staring in disbelief at the tendrils of wan light filtering into the tunnel from a narrow cleft in the wall. They writhed and pulsed in achingly familiar cadence, and with a surge of mingled hope and dread I realized what I was looking at. More of the strange bioluminescent mycelium I'd encountered earlier, its fibrous mesh penetrating the stone itself. Only there seemed to be more of it here. Whole ropes and skeins of glowing filament visible through the fissure. Heart pounding, I approached the cleft, squinting against the glare. Surely this was a sign, a marker in this pitch-black labyrinth. Where there were roots, there might be soil, or at least the promise of water and nutrients to sustain them. And where the fungus, if fungus it truly was, had gained purchase, there was a chance other organisms might eke out a living in its uncanny glow. The desperate hope of food, of some means to sustain my failing body a little longer, drew me toward the fissure like a moth to a flame. The cleft was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through sideways. I almost balked at the thought of wedging myself into that claustrophobic gap, rank with the loamy scent of lightless places, but the ache in my head and the void in my belly propelled me onward. Worse to die in the open with miles to go before I slept. I squirmed through, forcing myself to breathe evenly as the stones scraped my chest and back. The blue glow intensified the deeper I pushed, painting my scuffed fingers an eerie corpse light. Rivulets of cold sweat trickled down my face to plink on the stone, the tang of salt thick in my mouth. Just a little further, with a grunt I popped free into a small octagonal chamber, stumbling a little as my questing foot met empty air. I caught myself on the opposite wall, leaning against it as vertigo clutched at me. It took me a moment to realize that wall was thrumming beneath my splayed hand, not the deep basso rumble of shifting stone, but a softer, almost electric susurrus. I froze, fighting the sudden urge to rip my hand away. Slowly, dreading what I would see, I raked my gaze up from the damp floor and nearly screamed. The chamber was filled, floor to ceiling, with glowing, writhing coils of mycelium. It sheathed every surface like some leprous fungal cancer, pulsing and undulating in ceaseless motion. Thick ropes and branching fibers wove through each other in alien geometries, their eerie radiance painting the stone an unearthly blue. Here and there, grotesque fruiting bodies thrust from the mass. Mushroom caps and puffball shapes distended into tumorous, half-sentient growths. Spores drifted from them in luminous clouds, dancing on unseen currents. And at the center of it all, dominating the far wall, a shape so strange, so incomprehensible that my mind struggled to process it, a vast, pulsating mass of glowing tendrils, woven together into a dense, basket-like structure. It heaved and convulsed like a rotted heart, some awful parody of life. As I stared in dawning horror, I realized the shape was vaguely anthropoid, a tangle of stick-thin limbs and grasping digits splayed in mocking welcome. All it lacked was a head. Recognition burst through me, colder and blacker than the deepest abyss. In my delirium, I'd stumbled straight into the monster's lair, and from the looks of things, it had been busy in its absence. The thought of that hulking abomination tending this seething garden in the dark, shaping it into some perverse shrine. My gorge rose, black spots swimming before my eyes. But just as I made to turn, to flee this awful place before madness claimed me, something else caught my eye. There, nestled in the heart of that figural monstrosity, was a glint of metal, the unmistakable curve of dog tags, hanging from a bit of chain. 2 pairs, unless my blurring vision deceived me. Stevenson and Begay. My brothers, my recon team. The chopper descended through the inky darkness, its spotlight probing the dense Arizona forest below. Captain Asqueto Chavis gripped his pack and M4 carbine as he prepared to fast rope down to the LZ. Intel was sketchy, but there were reports of something big and vicious stalking these woods, something inhuman. As a member of the Army's elite supernatural threats unit, Chavis had faced some weird shit before. Chupacabras in New Mexico, a Wendigo in Montana, but never a Sasquatch. He wasn't even sure they existed outside of blurry photos and sensational tabloid stories. Until now. "Sir, we're 50 feet above the LZ," the crew chief shouted over the roar of the rotors. "You're clear to descend on my mark. 3, 2, 1, go." Chavis slid down the rope into a small clearing ringed by towering ponderosa pines. The chopper ascended back into the night sky, its rhythmic thumping fading into silence. He was utterly alone in the vast wilderness. "Chavis to base. I'm on the ground, beginning my mission," he said into his radio. "Copy that. Proceed to target area and report any sign of the creature. Lethal force is authorized. Get in, get it done, get out, base out." Chavis took a deep breath of crisp mountain air. He had a bad feeling about this op from the start. But orders were orders. He thought back to the cramped on-base housing where his wife Sheila and their 3 kids waited for his return. They barely scraped by on an E6 salary. Chavis volunteered for this mission, and the hefty bonus that came with it, so he could finally give his family the life they deserved. Maybe even buy a little cabin up here in the mountains, spend their summers fishing and hiking as a family. A blood-curdling howl echoed through the forest, snapping him back to the present. It sounded vaguely simian, but deeper and more guttural than any ape Chavis had ever heard. He raised his carbine and peered into the shadowy treeline. The hunt was on. Chavis moved silently through the forest, the damp underbrush masking his footfalls. These were the same highlands where his Apache ancestors once hunted deer and elk. As a boy on the reservation, the tribal elders taught him to track, forage, and melt unseen into the wilderness, skills that served him well in ranger school and now as an STU operator. He paused at the edge of a ravine and knelt to examine the soil. There were tracks, but not like anything he'd seen before. Humanoid but larger, the prints sunk deep into the soft earth. Chavis guessed the creature weighed at least 800 pounds. He froze as a pungent, musky odor filled his nostrils. It smelled like wet dog mixed with rotting meat. Something was watching him from the trees on the other side of the ravine. Chavis slowly raised his head. Two yellow eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the dim moonlight. They had to be at least 8 feet off the ground. The creature huffed, its breath visible in the cold night air. Chavis thumbed his rifle's safety off. Then the eyes disappeared as the creature turned and loped away into the forest. Chavis exhaled. He briefly considered pursuing it, but the ravine looked at least 40 feet deep. Better to find a way across. He glanced at the topographic map on his wrist dagger. There was an old Forest Service bridge a half-mile south. If he hurried, he might be able to pick up the creature's trail on the other side. As he jogged through the woods, Chavis couldn't shake an uneasy sense of déjà vu, like he'd been here before. There was something eerily familiar about this part of the forest. Chavis crossed the rickety wood bridge, his boots thumping hollowly on the weathered planks. On the other side, he quickly found the creature's prints and began following them west, deeper into the wilderness. The tracks led him to the entrance of a narrow box canyon. Chavis hesitated. The sheer rock walls made it a perfect spot for an ambush, but he couldn't turn back now, not when he was so close. He crept cautiously into the canyon, scanning the ridgelines for any sign of movement. 100 yards in, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. There, jutting from the canyon wall, was the wreckage of a helicopter, an Apache gunship, just like the ones Chavis flew in Afghanistan. What was it doing here, in the middle of nowhere? As he approached the downed chopper, a glint of metal caught his eye. Dog tags dangled from a rusted chain caught on a protruding piece of fuselage. No, it couldn't be. With a shaking hand, Chavis grabbed the tags and wiped away the grime. The name engraved on them hit him like a punch to the gut. Chavis, SQ-WED-OJ, 756, 233383, OPOS. Apache, they were his tags. But that was impossible. He was standing right here, alive, his tags around his neck. What the hell was going on? A guttural growl emanated from the shadows at the back of the canyon. Chavis spun to see the creature emerge from behind a boulder, its shaggy fur matted with blood, yellow fangs bared in a snarl. It was bipedal, at least 9 feet tall, with thick, corded muscles rippling beneath its hide. The creature roared and charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Chavis flew backwards as a massive arm swatted him like a rag doll. He slammed into the canyon wall and crumpled to the ground, his carbine clattering out of reach. Through blurred vision, Chavis saw the creature looming over him, raising a taloned paw for the killing blow. A thunderous boom echoed off the canyon walls. The creature stumbled back, a gaping hole blown in its chest. Chavis looked up to see a squad of heavily armed soldiers in black fatigues rappelling down from the cliffs above. Go, go, go! Take that fucker out! One of the soldiers opened up on full auto, stitching the creature from groin to neck. It bellowed in pain and rage, lashing out at its attackers, but there were too many, their armor-piercing rounds chewing through flesh and bone like paper. The creature toppled backwards, its lifeblood pooling on the dusty canyon floor. It heaved one last rattling breath and was still. A soldier grabbed Chavis's arm and hauled him to his feet. "Captain Chavis, what's the last thing you remember?" Chavis shook his head, trying to clear the fog. I was on a mission. Solo recon, tracking the creature." The soldier nodded grimly. "Sir, I'm sorry, but that's not entirely accurate. You disappeared on that mission over 3 years ago. We've been searching for you ever since." 3 years? That's not... I don't understand. Your chopper went down in hostile territory. By the time we reached the crash site, you were gone, no sign of your body. Intel reported a Sasquatch-like creature in the area. We've been hunting it, and you, ever since." Chavis's head swam. Memories came trickling back. Fire and metal raining from the sky. Searing pain as talons raked his flesh. An ancient cave. Hideous creatures gathered around a blood-stained altar. His legs buckled and he sank to his knees. It wasn't just déjà vu he'd felt out in these woods. He'd lived this nightmare before, been transformed by the very monstrosity he was sent to destroy. Now it all came crashing back in brutal clarity. "My God," he whispered. What have I done? The soldier helped Chavis to the waiting Blackhawk on the canyon rim. Inside, a medic attended to his wounds while the soldier cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sir, I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife Sheila, your kids, they held out hope you were alive for a long time. But after a year, the army declared you killed in action. Sheila, she took it hard, started drinking, pills. The soldier looked away. Chavis felt a cold knot of dread forming in his gut. She couldn't take care of herself, let alone 3 little ones. CPS took the kids, put them in foster care. Then one day Sheila's neighbor noticed she hadn't seen her in a while. Police found her body. I'm sorry, sir, she OD'd. A howl of anguish tore from Chavis's throat. He buried his face in his hands. The bleak future he'd envisioned, the cozy cabin, his children playing in the sun, it was all ash now, scattered to the unforgiving winds. What a fool he'd been, chasing money in the darkness. He'd had his treasure all along, and carelessly squandered it. The bitter irony was almost too much to bear. The Blackhawk rose above the tree line, leaving the blood-soaked canyon behind. As Chavis gazed numbly out the window, he saw his own ghostly reflection staring back at him, gaunt, scarred, utterly hollowed out. Just another broken thing, left to haunt this god-forsaken wilderness. The doctors said it was a miracle Chavis survived his time in the wilds. The creature transmitted some unknown pathogen to him, warped his body and mind. They promised the mutations were reversible, that he'd be back to normal with the proper therapies. Physically, at least, Chavis didn't care. Normal was a life that no longer existed. He'd been given a second chance, but at the cost of everything he once held dear. The children were placed with a good Apache family on the reservation, they told him. They'd be raised in the old traditions, taught the stories and wisdom of their people. It was the one bright spot in all this, knowing they'd be spared the hardships he and Sheila faced as army brats bouncing from post to post. Weeks turned into months. The doctors deemed Chavis fit to return to duty. His commanding officer offered him an honorable discharge. No one would blame you for getting out after all you've been through, he said with a sad smile. But Chavis couldn't imagine a civilian life, not anymore. Wearing the uniform was the only thing that still made sense. Besides, STU needed him more than ever now that the existence of creatures like Sasquatch was a confirmed reality. He had an obligation to make sure no one else suffered his fate, so on a crisp fall morning he stood at attention while the CO pinned a purple heart to his chest. Chavis stared straight ahead as a chilling realization took hold. That dark canyon in Arizona hadn't been an end, but a twisted new beginning. A second life, forged in blood and sorrow. Perhaps it was fitting, Chavis thought. He was a monster who hunted monsters, forever doomed to stalk the shadows between worlds. After what he'd seen, what he'd become, a normal life was the only thing more terrifying than the horrors that awaited him. As the first snow dusted the pines outside, Chavis shouldered his rifle and headed out into the gathering dark. The hunt was on. Fowley, the old dirt road, wound through the ponderosa pines, climbing steadily into the remote wilderness of the Arizona mountains. Special Agent Kelly Behorse guided his jeep over the ruts and rocks, the vehicle bouncing and lurching with each bump. He wouldn't normally take an assignment like this, but with Aubrey out of work and medical bills piling up, he couldn't afford to say no. The Army was willing to pay well for his particular skill set. Big Horse had grown up on the Fort Apache reservation, spending his youth exploring these very woods. He knew them like the back of his scarred hand, those countless hours tracking game, foraging for food, and learning the old ways from his Apache elders made him uniquely qualified for this mission. But just what that mission entailed, his superiors had kept frustratingly vague. Something had the brass spooked, that much was clear. There were rumors of people vanishing in this area, campers, hikers, forest rangers. The disappearances went back decades but had increased in recent years. The locals blamed Mogollon Monster, a mythical ape-like creature said to roam the wilderness. Big Horse put little stock in campfire tales, but he knew better than to dismiss ancient wisdom out of hand. The old stories often held kernels of truth. Rounding a bend, he spotted the weathered cabin tucked in a stand of aspens. This would serve as his base for the next few days as he surveyed the area. With any luck, he'd find the answers the Army wanted and be back home to Aubrey and the kids in time for the weekend. He parked the Jeep and unloaded his gear. The cabin was small but well built, with a sturdy roof and a stone chimney. Inside were a few pieces of rough-hewn furniture, a cot, a table, a chair. Big Horse set about unpacking his supplies and inspecting his equipment: night vision goggles, motion sensors, infrared cameras, a high-powered rifle. The Army had spared no expense. But most essential was his grandfather's hunting knife, a treasured heirloom and trusty companion on many a mission. With daylight fading, he took a moment to step outside and breathe in the crisp mountain air. Aspens whispered in the breeze and birds sung their evening songs, but beneath the tranquil surface, Big Horse sensed something amiss, a strange stillness, an undercurrent of menace. He shook it off. He'd learned long ago to trust his instincts, but he also knew how the mind could play tricks in the darkness. Back inside, he laid out his maps and planned his patrol routes for the next day. He'd start with the nearest sites of the recent disappearances and spiral outward from there, looking for any signs of tracks, scat, or disturbances. But as he studied the contour lines and elevation markers, his eyelids grew heavy. At last, he rolled into his sleeping bag and switched off his lamp, rifle close at hand. Tomorrow the hunt would begin in earnest. A piercing cry split the pre-dawn gloom, jolting Big Horse awake. He grabbed his rifle and rolled to his feet, senses on high alert. It sounded like a woman's scream, coming from deep within the woods. Hastily pulling on his boots, he charged out into the twilight. The waning moon cast long shadows across the forest floor as he sprinted between the trees, dodging branches and leaping deadfall. The screams continued, growing more desperate, spurring him on. 100 horrible scenarios flashed through his head. He found her thrashing on the ground in a small clearing, her clothing torn and bloodied. In the dim light, he couldn't make out her features, but her terror was palpable. Big Horse approached slowly, hands open. "I'm here to help," he said in what he hoped was a calming voice. "I'm with the U.S. Army. You're safe now." The woman stared at him with wide, wild eyes. She stammered something unintelligible, her words lost in gasping sobs. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Big Horse kneeled down but maintained his distance, not wanting to spook her further. She shook her head frantically, then raised a quivering hand to point at something over his shoulder. It took them, oh God, it took them all." A chill raced down Big Horse's spine. He spun around, searching the tree line, but saw nothing in the murky shadows. Turning back to the woman, he found only flattened grass where she'd been laying a moment before. He whipped around in a circle, pulse pounding. She had vanished without a trace. A branch cracked in the underbrush behind him. He wheeled toward the sound, raising his rifle. A hulking figure emerged from the darkness. Far too tall to be human, shaggy fur covered its body and its face was twisted into a hideous ape-like sneer. Big Horse felt the breath leave his lungs. It couldn't be. The creature opened its mouth and let loose an ear-splitting roar. Then it charged. Big Horse squeezed the trigger, the rifle bucking against his shoulder. Once, twice, 3 times, the thunderous shots rang through the clearing. The beast staggered but kept coming, impossibly fast for its size. Big Horse turned to run, heart jackhammering against his ribcage. He crashed through the undergrowth, praying his memory of the terrain would guide him true. The creature's enraged bellows seemed to come from all around, echoing through the trees. Lungs burning, Big Horse burst into another clearing and found himself at the mouth of a cave. A yawning void cut into a sheer rock face. Ancient petroglyphs marked the entrance, faded red ochre swirls that almost seemed to undulate in the moonlight. He hesitated for only a second before plunging into the throat of darkness. If he could find a defensible position, he might stand a chance, but the cave floor sloped sharply downward, becoming treacherously slick. Big Horse lost his footing and tumbled into the abyss, rifle clattering away into the blackness. He scrambled for purchase, but the stone offered no handholds. Down and down he slid, the dank air growing colder with every passing second. At last he landed with a bone-jarring thud on a spongy surface, knocking the wind from him. Gasping, he rolled onto his back and found himself staring up at a canopy of glowing moss, faint bioluminescence washing the cavern in an eerie green twilight. At the edge of the light, something moved. Big Horse shot to his feet, ignoring the spikes of pain radiating through his body. He fumbled for his knife, the blade seeming pitifully small in his shaking hand. The darkness shifted and undulated, drawing closer with each ragged breath. Then a voice rasped out from the depths, grinding and ancient like boulders rolling in a riverbed. "You should not be here." A shape congealed from the shadows, stooped and skeletal, cloaked in matted fur. Big Horse blinked, trying to resolve the figure into something comprehensible. It was vaguely humanoid, but its limbs were too long, its head too misshapen, and the eyes glowed a dull, rotting yellow. What are you?" Big Horse managed through a throat clenched with terror. The creature croaked. "The last of the people." An icy realization crept over Big Horse. The petroglyphs, The old stories, the things that shambled in the night, the Apache had whispered of them for generations, ancient things from an antediluvian age. Not quite human, but something more, or less. The creature shuffled closer, its rank musk filling Big Horse's nostrils. He fought down the urge to gag. "You have trespassed," it creaked. "Your blood is now forfeit." Big Horse's mind raced, dredging up every scrap of Apache lore he could remember. Tales of bargains struck, of ancient pacts. He lowered his knife slowly, letting the reassuring steel slip from his fingers. "I meant no disrespect, grandfather. I come seeking wisdom." The creature paused, cocking its head. Big Horse pushed on, praying he was choosing the right words. "The surface world has forgotten the old ways, but some of us still keep the traditions, still pay proper reverence to the people below." "Reverence?" the creature hissed, moving close enough for Big Horse to feel its fetid breath. "You invade our lands, defile our sacred places, and you speak of reverence." Big Horse swallowed hard. "I seek only to understand, to learn from you and preserve your teachings, to honor the treaties between our kinds." The creature stared at him for an eternity, unblinking. Then, slowly, it extended one gnarled claw. "Come then, man-child, we will see if you are worthy." Relief flooded through Big Horse. He reached out and grasped the leathery appendage, suppressing a shudder at its cold, pliant touch. As he did, the creature's eyes flashed a brighter, more vital yellow. Images began to flicker through Big Horse's mind, sensations of falling, writhing, changing, of aeons spent in swirling darkness, consciousness scattered and reforming in maddening cycles. Secrets not meant for mortal minds. He wrenched his hand free with a gasp, staggering backward. The connection broke, but the foreign thoughts still clawed at his psyche. The creature loomed over him, a cruel grin splitting its lips. "You are not ready for the deepest mysteries, but come, I will show you other wonders, horrors and revelations beyond your ken." With that, it turned and lumbered off into an adjoining tunnel. Big Horse hurried to follow, his feet carrying him forward even as his instincts screamed to flee. Deeper into the mountain they went, through vaulted chambers of glittering crystal and forests of petrified fungus, past heaps of yellowed bones and grotesquely carved idols that wept black fluid in the faint luminance. At last they came to a great domed cavern, its walls pulsing with warm, ruddy light. In the center of the space stood a vast stone altar stained and scarred from aeons of grim use. Upon that altar lay a book, bound in cracked grayish leather that Big Horse desperately tried to convince himself was not flayed human skin. The creature took the book in its gnarled claws and thrust it toward Big Horse. "Here is the knowledge you seek, the secrets of the people, of the rights we work to. Placate those from beyond." Big Horse reached for the tome, fingers hovering over the grotesque cover. Dark power seemed to thrum from it, whispering seductively at the edge of his mind. Slowly, carefully, he opened it. The pages were filled with blasphemous sigils and twisted diagrams, instructions for rituals too vile to imagine, but Big Horse found he could not look away, could not stop turning the fragile leaves. Each glyph seared itself into his mind, branding his soul with their diseased geometries. Distantly, as if from underwater, he heard the creature speaking. "You have your precious wisdom, man-child. Now the price must be paid." Big Horse felt something cold wrap around his leg, yanking him off balance. He fell heavily, the book tumbling from his hands. More clammy appendages seized his limbs, dragging him inexorably toward the altar. He thrashed and fought, but their grip was iron. Through the haze of horror, Big Horse saw the creature looming above him, a cruel obsidian blade clutched in its claw. Those leprous yellow eyes glinted with a kind of mad glee. "The old ones hunger," it crowed. "They demand sacrifice." The knife descended, and Big Horse screamed. His blood flowed in rivulets across the basalt slab, seeping into the eldritch runes chiseled in its surface. The cavern began to shake, great slabs of stone crashing down around them. A noxious black smoke billowed up from the spreading pool of gore, coalescing into a writhing, tentacled mass. And then, only darkness. Big Horse awoke with a ragged gasp, his lungs searing as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. He was lying on cold, damp stone, limbs askew. His head pounded mercilessly. With a groan, he pushed himself up to sitting, wincing as pain lanced through his hands. Looking down, he saw his palms were scraped raw, nails torn and bloody. What in God's name had happened? Memory came rushing back. The screams, the creature, the cave, the book, the altar. Big Horse frantically scrabbled at his chest, expecting to find gaping wounds, but his fingers met only torn fabric sticky with half-dried blood. He peeled his shirt up, marveling at the unbroken skin beneath. Was it all some kind of fever dream, a hallucination? He'd heard of shamans using potent herbs and mushrooms to induce visions, to walk between worlds. Maybe he'd accidentally ingested something in the woods, some psychotropic fungus. Unsteadily, he climbed to his feet, surveying his surroundings. He was still in the cave, but in a different chamber, one he didn't recognize. The walls were closer here, the ceiling lower. Tree roots dangled through cracks in the limestone, seeking moisture. He spotted his rifle laying nearby, caked in mud but apparently undamaged. Scooping it up, he sucked in a deep breath, trying to get his bearings. He'd been trained to handle hostile situations, taught techniques to remain calm and rational under duress. He could puzzle this out. Closing his eyes, he listened, straining to catch anything beyond the hammering of his own heart. Dripping water, the soft skitter of cave crickets, his own ragged breathing. No screams, no roars, no eldritch chanting. Emboldened, he opened his eyes and took a tentative step forward. The toe of his boot hit something soft, yielding. He glanced down and bit back a yelp. A man lay crumpled at his feet, throat torn open in a gaping crimson smile. Bile surged up Big Horse's gullet. He knew that face, even slack and blood-drained. It was one of the missing hikers, a young man he'd seen in the briefing photos. Brian Hawkins, 24, an experienced outdoorsman. He'd vanished 2 weeks ago near one of the trails. Big Horse's gaze darted around the chamber as horrid realization sank in. More bodies littered the floor, discarded like broken dolls. Men, women, even a child, all in varying states of dismemberment and decay. The missing campers, the lost forest rangers. Bile seared the back of his throat, acrid and stinging. He spotted a gap in the cavern wall, a black mouth leading still deeper into the earth. The rational part of his mind screamed to turn back, to get the hell out of this subterranean charnel house. But another instinct pulled him onward, a desperate need to understand, to see this grim journey through no matter the cost. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and stepped gingerly between the corpses. The tunnel twisted and turned, opening into progressively larger chambers. Big Horse's boots crunched on stone shot through with quartz and mica, glittering in his flashlight beam. Stalactites reached down from the ceiling like rotting teeth and necrotic gums. The cloying stench of decay mingled with a sharp metallic scent he couldn't quite place. Then the path ended and Big Horse found himself standing at the shore of a vast underground lake, its placid surface black as tar. Mounds of pale fleshy pods fringed the water, pulsing gently. With mounting horror, he realized they were egg sacs, each large enough to hold a crouched human form. A few gaped open, torn and empty. He played his light over the hatchery, counting dozens upon dozens of the membranous ovoids. Revulsion twisted in his guts as the terrible truth crashed over him. The creature, its fetid amniotic lair, the missing people entombed in oozing pupae. Big Horse knew now what he faced. Not some shaman's fever dream, but a very real abomination. An antediluvian horror that had survived the epochs by turning human prey into incubators for its foul get. Slowly, Big Horse raised his gun, flicking off the safety. A piercing shriek rang out across the cavern, echoing from the walls. Dozens of shimmering yellow eyes flared to life in the darkness, fixed squarely on him. Big Horse felt icy dread paralyze his limbs as the first misshapen forms erupted from the shallows, their guttural roars shaking the very stone. He whispered a prayer to the Creator, begging for a swift end. Then the horde was upon him. The helicopter rotors whipped the air, downdraft whipping Big Horse's hair across his ash-smeared face. He stared numbly at the ponderosa pines whipping by below, barely registering the medic tightening a blood pressure cuff around his bicep. "BP's steady," the man called to the pilot over the engine's roar. 100/80. Mild tachycardia, but that's to be expected with the trauma and the dehydration. The pilot grunted in acknowledgement and banked the chopper, angling toward the cluster of flashing lights on the horizon. Big Horse let the noise wash over him, his mind mercifully blank. After a time, he felt a hand on his shoulder. The medic again. Brow knit in concern, the man leaned close, raising his voice to be heard in the compartment. "Agent Big Horse? We're about 10 minutes out from Fort Huachuca. They've got a full medical team standing by. You're going to get the best possible care, I promise." Big Horse nodded mechanically, though in truth he could scarcely process the words. The events of the past days felt distant and unreal, like scenes from a half-remembered film. But the cuts and bruises littering his body told a different story. In snatches and fragments it came back to him. The chaos and blood of that final battle. The frenzied slashing of talons, the burning sting of acid spray. eldritch words bubbling from abominable throats, their syllables scouring his sanity. And at last the rumbling crack of stone giving way, an entire level of the cave system collapsing in on itself, burying the writhing broods, and nearly Big Horse along with them. He'd clawed his way back to the surface in a blind delirium, stumbling into daylight just as the search and rescue choppers flew their first grid. Dumb luck, or divine providence. Big Horse wasn't sure he cared which. All that mattered was that the nightmares beneath the mountain were sealed away, drowned in rubble and riven earth. But even as that thought formed, nagging doubt wormed at the edges of his mind. The memories, fragmented as they were, felt too sharp, too vivid to be mere hallucinations, and there were the injuries even now throbbing beneath layers of gauze and tape. What if it had been real? What if some of the horrors had survived the cave-in? What if, even now, they were squirming through tunnels and fissures, seeking a way back to the world above? Big Horse shook his head sharply, banishing those dire imaginings. It did no good to dwell on such things, not when there was nothing to be done. Whatever the truth of the matter, he'd made his report. Let the brass sort it out, or bury it as they saw fit. His part in this grim drama was over. All he wanted now was to go home to his family, to hold his children and never let go. The medic squeezed his shoulder again, startling him from his dark reverie. We're on final approach now, Agent Big Horse. The med team will take you from here. Big Horse nodded his thanks, mouth dry. Then, impulsively, he reached out to catch the man's wrist as he turned away. Those hikers, the people who went missing. Did they find any sign? A shadow passed over the medic's face. He hesitated a moment, then shook his head. I'm sorry, Agent. So far, search and rescue hasn't found any survivors. Big Horse swallowed against a surge of grief, of helpless rage. All those innocent lives, snuffed out in such senseless slaughter, the unfairness of it, the cruel caprice of a hostile universe, threatened to overwhelm him. But no, he couldn't afford to break, not now. He had to be strong, for Aubrey, for the kids, for the memory of the fallen. He would heal, in body and mind, and he would ensure their stories were told, that their names were remembered, their families given closure. It was, he decided, the very least he could do. With that vow burning in his heart, Special Agent Kelly Big Horse stepped off the helicopter and into the waiting arms of his fellow soldiers, his brothers in arms. Come what horrors may, he would face them standing tall, for he was a child of the Apache, a son of warriors and wise men, and no darkness, no matter how primordial or profane, could ever extinguish the light of human courage, of the dauntless spirit that drove seekers of truth to the farthest reaches of the possible. Big Horse smiled grimly to himself, tasting blood and ash. So it has always been, and so it would be evermore, until the stars themselves winked out and reality crumbled into the void. Amen. Special Agent Kelly Big Horse strode through the glass double doors of Groom Lake Base Infirmary, the buttery afternoon sunlight dazzling after 2 hours of medical exams and debriefs. He felt drained in a soul-deep way he couldn't quite articulate, but there was a steely resolution in it too, a commitment to the path that now lay before him. In the weeks since his return from the Arizona wilderness, Big Horse had convalesced in both body and spirit. The lacerations and fractures had healed, the nightmares receded to a manageable background static, but the questions remained, nagging at his every waking thought. What were those creatures truly? Vestiges of some prehistoric relict race, or beings from beyond the stars? What bleak intelligence drove them to such grim ends? And were there others out there, lurking in the shadowed places, waiting for some cataclysmic alignment to unleash them upon an unsuspecting world? Big Horse had no answers, but he'd vowed to find them, whatever the cost. To that end, he'd leveraged every shred of backroom clout his years of clandestine service had earned, called in every favor and twisted every arm, until at last he found himself here, at the heart of the military's most obscure and unacknowledged program. Majestic 12, they called it. Ostensibly a research division under Air Force Space Command, but in truth, something far stranger. An investigation unit, tasked since 1947 with confronting paranormal threats to national security, threats like those that lurked beneath the Mogollon Rim. They knew. Of course they knew. And Big Horse would plumb the depths of their terrible wisdom. Agent Big Horse. A clipped voice rang across the parking lot. Big Horse turned to see a stern-faced Air Force captain striding toward him, arm extended. Captain Rivera, Big Horse said, shaking the man's hand firmly. Thank you for expediting the intake process. Least we could do considering what you went through, Rivera replied. And what you'll be up against from here. Big Horse arched an eyebrow. So I'm given to understand. When do I start? Rivera gestured toward a Humvee idling by the curb, its windows tinted impenetrably black. No time like the present. You're to report to the Project Aladdin briefing room immediately. I'll be your driver, and officially this conversation never happened. Big Horse nodded, unsurprised. And where exactly are we going? Sub-level 6, Rivera said, moving toward the vehicle. The archives. Big Horse blew out a slow breath, squaring his shoulders against a sudden chill. He had a feeling this was one rabbit hole with no bottom. But by God and the Great Spirit, he would see it through. Then lead on, Captain. It seems I have work to do. Rivera flashed a cold smile and opened the Humvee's armored door with a ponderous clunk. Welcome to Majestic 12. Special Agent Big Horse. Welcome to the Abyss. The crisp autumn air bit at Akeshita's exposed skin as he trudged through the dense wilderness of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. The towering ponderosa pines cast long shadows across the forest floor, the fading light of dusk barely penetrating the thick canopy overhead. He adjusted the heavy pack on his back, the weight of his supplies and gear already taking their toll just a few hours into this covert mission. Akeshita had served in the U.S. Army for the past 6 years, deployed twice to active war zones, but nothing in his military training could have fully prepared him for an assignment like this. When his commanding officer had called him into headquarters 2 weeks ago, he knew it had to be serious. They were assigning him to a top-secret special ops mission, solo, no backup, comms on radio silence. Something had the brass spooked, but they wouldn't say what. All he knew is he was to hike deep into this remote stretch of forest along the Arizona/New Mexico border and rendezvous with a local informant who supposedly had critical intelligence about a matter of national security. No other details were provided. He was to tell no one, not even his girlfriend Maria or his younger brother Chayton, who lived with him back home in Phoenix. The meager bonus pay was the only reason he had accepted the cryptic mission. Akeshita had been drowning in credit card debt and was months behind on rent, the result of too many nights drinking and gambling, trying to block out the trauma of the things he'd seen at war. This assignment was his chance to get back on his feet financially, to make a dent in the debt and get the collectors off his back. All he had to do was complete the mission. But now, alone in this sprawling forest, an uneasy feeling twisted in his gut. He hadn't seen another human in hours, and an eerie stillness hung in the air, the usual sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. As the sun slipped below the horizon and darkness fell like a heavy blanket, he picked up his pace, eager to make a few more miles before having to make camp for the night. He clicked on his headlamp and pulled out his topo map and compass, double-checking that he was still on the right bearing. That's when he heard it. A distant wailing howl that made his blood run cold. It sounded almost human, but warped and unnatural, like a person in excruciating pain. The hairs on the back of Akeshita's neck stood on end. He knew the legends his grandfather used to tell by the campfire when he was a boy. The stories of the Wendigo, an evil spirit that could possess people, transforming them into crazed cannibalistic monsters. His people, the Navajo, had long feared this dark being that was said to stalk the forests. Akeshita shook his head, trying to dispel such ridiculous superstitions. He was a trained soldier, not some gullible, frightened child. There had to be a logical explanation, perhaps a wounded animal or the wind playing tricks in the trees. He quickened his pace even more, wanting to put distance between himself and the unsettling sound. But as he glanced over his shoulder, he could swear he glimpsed a tall, gaunt figure moving between the pines and the darkness behind him. The night pressed in around Akeshita as he hastily made camp beneath a copse of aspens, their leaves shimmering like silver dollars in the moonlight. His heart still raced from the uncanny howl he had heard earlier and the fleeting glimpse of that emaciated figure in the trees. Every snapped twig or rustling branch caused him to whirl around, his hand instinctively going for the pistol holstered on his belt. "Get it together," he muttered under his breath, annoyed at how easily spooked he had become, like some green private on his first field exercise. He was a seasoned Army Ranger, part of an elite warrior class. He had faced insurgents and terrorists, been shot at and seen friends blown to pieces by IEDs. He could handle a solo hike through the woods and whatever imaginary monsters his mind conjured up. Akeshita busied himself with the practiced motions of setting up camp, collecting dry kindling, building a small fire, boiling water for his MRE rations. The ritual helped ease his jangled nerves. But even once he crawled into his bivy sack for a few hours of restless sleep, he kept his rifle and 9mm within easy reach. Old habits die hard. Whispered voices invaded Aketa's troubled dreams, speaking in urgent Navajo, a language he had never fully learned but could vaguely understand. They warned of a ravenous evil spirit that fed on human flesh, overtaking the minds of men. He tossed and turned, a cold sweat beading on his brow despite the chill night air. Then the voices grew silent, and in their place came that agonized wail once more, closer now. The mournful sound of a predator on the hunt. Akesha jolted awake with a startled oath, his hand already aiming his pistol into the darkness beyond the fading embers of his fire. But the night was still, no sign of any threat. Just the susurration of the breeze through the golden leaves and the muted sounds of crickets and owls. "Damn it, get a grip," Akeketa growled in frustration, rubbing his burning, bloodshot eyes. He checked his watch, 0330 already. He figured there was no point in trying to get any more sleep at this point. He would pack up and get back on the trail, make up for some of the time lost yesterday. He wanted to reach the rendezvous coordinates with the informant by sundown tonight and get this bizarre mission over with. As Akeketa quickly broke camp, shoving gear into his ruck, he couldn't shake the lingering dread from his dream. In the stories, the Wendigo's hunger was never sated, its thirst for human blood never quenched. Was something out here in this forest, stalking him, pursuing him as the hapless rabbit flees the wolf? He threw on his pack with a grunt, tightening the straps across his shoulders, and checked his map one last time. If he pushed hard today, he could reach the meeting spot by late afternoon. Then, answers. He stepped out onto the faint trail leading northeast, swallowed up by the lightning gloom as dawn prepared to break over the eastern pines. The morning sun slanted through the treetops, dappling the forest floor in a patchwork quilt of light and shadow. Birds flitted between branches and squirrels chattered as they scurried up trunks, gathering their stores for the coming winter. But even as the woods came alive with the daily work of its inhabitants, Akeketa could not shake the unmistakable impression that he was being watched. Hunted. He had hiked hard all morning, his camelback nearly empty and his t-shirt drenched in sweat despite the crisp bite of late autumn. He figured he had to be getting close to the rendezvous coordinates now. He paused atop an outcropping of rust-colored sandstone to check the topo map again, catching his breath. Aspen leaves cartwheeled across the rocks, the burnt shade of old pennies. That's when Akeke spotted it, a structure of some kind through the filigree of turning leaves and pine boughs. It appeared to be an old trapper's cabin, the weathered logs nearly the same gray as the tree trunks surrounding it. Perhaps it was the meeting place for the informant. Akeketa dropped into a crouch and unshouldered his rifle, scanning the tree line as he had been trained. But no other human sound or movement betrayed itself. Still, the skin prickled on the back of his neck as he approached the cabin with careful steps, boots silent on the forest loam. The feeling of being tracked had only grown stronger throughout the day. He checked the action on his rifle before calling out. "Hello? Anyone there? U.S. Army, I'm here for the meeting." Nothing but the sigh of the wind greeted him in response. Akeketa cautiously pushed open the rough-hewn door with the muzzle of his gun, the rusted hinges screeching in protest. The interior of the small, one-room cabin was draped in shadow, the only light filtering in through chinks between the logs. A mouse skittered into the recesses as he entered. He could make out an old wooden table and chairs, an iron stove, a few pieces of broken crockery scattered about. And something else, as his eyes adjusted. Akeketa's breath caught in his throat. There, on the dirt floor, was a desiccated human skeleton splayed out on its back. Bits of leathered skin and sinew still clung to the bones, tattered fragments of clothing rotted underneath. It looked like it had been there for months. "What the hell?" he muttered. Had this been the informant he was supposed to meet? He saw no sign of violence, no bullet holes or blade marks on the bones, but the grinning skull sent a chill slaloming down his spine. People didn't just lay down and die like this without a reason. Akeketa backed quickly out of the cabin, gulping the clean forest air. Something was seriously wrong here. Was this some kind of setup? Had his mission been compromised? He decided to radio his commander. Secrecy be damned. He unclipped the walkie from his belt and depressed the talk button. "Reaper 1 to base. Come in base. Over." Nothing but crackling static on the line. He tried again. "Reaper 1 to base. I've got a situation here. Over." Again, no response but the hiss of dead air. A leaden dread began to build in Aketa's stomach, a coiling serpent of unease. This felt like one of his grandfather's stories come to life, but he couldn't succumb to such irrational fears. He checked his map with shaking hands, plotting a hasty route back to civilization. He needed to regroup, report in at the closest ranger station or town. As he marked his bearings, a shout in the near distance shattered the sylvan quiet. Then another hoarse scream, threaded with pain and terror. Someone needed help. His instincts kicked in and he sprinted in the direction of the tortured sound, unaware he was being herded into the monster's trap. Branches whipped at Akeshita's face as he crashed through the underbrush toward the desperate screams, thorny scrub brambles clutching at his fatigues like clawed fingers. The panicked shouts were coming from a wooded draw just ahead, the sounds echoing off the sandstone bluffs in distorted ricochets. He barreled between the pines, hurtling over deadfalls, his breath ragged in his ears. He exploded into a small clearing and pulled up short, momentarily confused. There was no sign of another person, no ongoing struggle or attack as he had expected. Just a carpet of dying bracken fading to brown and skeletal trees clawing at the sky. He panned his rifle in a cautious arc, looking for any movement in the shadows. Then he saw them. Tatters of fabric fluttering from a low branch at the other side of the clearing, about chest high. Akeshita approached slowly, his spine itching with weariness. When he got close enough, he could see the fabric was drenched in fresh blood, bits of torn flesh still clinging to it, as if someone had been eaten. Akeshita recoiled in horror and revulsion. What could have done this? A bear? A cougar? Some other predator? He had seen animals attack humans before, but never like this, leaving no body behind. He stared at the blood-soaked shreds and fought down the surge of bile rising in his throat. That's when he noticed the other clues littered about the forest floor as if in mocking invitation. A worn hiking boot, the heel streaked with red, a shattered pair of eyeglasses, a dirt-smeared backpack, its straps cleanly severed. He recognized the style, standard-issue infantry ruck, just like the one he carried. An awful realization began to dawn on Akeshita with sickening certainty. These were no innocent hikers or campers who had fallen victim to an animal attack. This was deliberate staging. The killer was taunting him, showing him how easily it could strike without warning or mercy, leaving just ravaged pieces of its prey behind. Akeshita backed away from the grim scene, his pulse pounding in his temples. He was being hunted by something far worse than any beast of nature. The Wendigo preyed on human beings, killing them, consuming them, possessing them. How long had it been stalking him through this forest? Was he to be its next meal? Suddenly, a large shadow detached from the darkness beneath a massive ponderosa at the edge of the clearing. A huge creature stepped forward on long, emaciated limbs, its hairless skin as gray as a corpse. Akeshita forgot how to breathe. It had an almost human form, but no human could tower 8 feet tall and move with such lurching, predatory grace. No human had a face like that, more skull than flesh, lipless maw stretched in a rictus grin filled with needle teeth. And those eyes, dear God, those blazing eyes. Training took over and Akeshita raised his rifle, firing off a panicked burst directly at center mass. The shots thudded into the monster's torso, but it barely flinched, as if the bullets were no more than bee stings. Then it spoke. Its voice the grating rasp of a rusted blade on bone. You cannot kill me with your weapons, little soldier. I am Yinal Delushi. I am the hunger that walks, and you will be my next feast. It lunged at him faster than a diving raptor, talon hands outstretched and dripping with gore. Akeshita screamed and fled into the trees, the staccato boom of gunfire swallowed by the indifferent woods. Akeshita's heart jackhammered against his ribs as he sprinted through the forest, dodging trees and leaping deadfalls in a pure adrenaline rush of primal terror. He could hear the crashing pursuit of the Wendigo behind him, the snapping of branches and its eager panting breaths as it gave chase. The sour reek of old blood and rancid meat stung his nostrils. He had to find a way to escape this phantasmagorical nightmare made real. Nothing in his elite combat training had prepared him to fight an unkillable cannibal spirit monster. His bullets had done nothing but enrage it. He supposed he should be grateful it hadn't simply torn him limb from limb in that clearing. No, it wanted to prolong the hunt, savor the fear of its prey before the inevitable bloody end. An old Navajo story his grandfather once told him flashed unbidden through Akeshita's mind. In it, a young warrior was being pursued by the Wendigo and fled into a cave to hide. The evil spirit couldn't find him in the subterranean darkness, so the warrior was able to escape. Maybe, just maybe, if he could find a cave or some other refuge, he could wait out the creature until dawn. Anecdotally, it was said the Wendigo hunted mostly by night. Akeshita scanned the passing terrain as he ran, blinking away the stinging sweat dripping into his eyes. There, up ahead on a pine-crowned bluff, the black wound of a cave mouth puckering the stone. If he could just reach it, the Wendigo's rasping breath was hot on his neck. He could almost feel the ghosting brush of its grasping claws. He put on a final burst of speed, lungs burning and thigh muscles screaming. The cave gaped before him like the entrance to the underworld. Akeketa dove through the opening, rolling across the damp stone and fetching up against the far wall. He scrambled to his feet, fumbling for the flashlight at his belt. The weak beam illuminated a small chamber, the walls pressing close, no other exits, and standing at the threshold, filling it with its cadaverous bulk, was the Wendigo. Its eyes flickered with malevolent amusement as it regarded him, its head cocked almost coyly to one side. Akecha was well and truly trapped now, with no hope of escape. "Did you really think you could elude me, little rabbit?" It spoke, its voice a guttural rattle. "There is no hiding from the hunger that walks. I can smell your succulent terror." Akeketa pressed his back against the clammy rock, raising his rifle in shaking hands. The monster took a step into the cave, its talons clicking on the stone. In a flash of fatalistic desperation, Akeketa emptied the rest of his magazine into the advancing fiend, screaming in hopeless defiance. The muzzle flashes strobed the scene in frenzied stop motion. The Wendigo's death grin, the spatter of dark blood on pale skin, the snap of its jaws. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Gasping, Aketa lowered the rifle with numb fingers. Impossibly, the Wendigo still stood, its ghastly form looming in the cave entrance. Black blood oozed from the bullet holes pocking its pale flesh, but it seemed more annoyed than injured. It shook its head almost pityingly. "Foolish mortal, your weapons are useless against me. I am eternal hunger, undying thirst, and your flesh and fear will sate me this night." It lunged, crossing the cave in a single bound. Taloned fingers closed around Aketeta's throat, slamming him against the stone wall. His vision swam with red as the Wendigo's grip tightened inexorably, crushing the breath from him. He struggled weakly, hands batting ineffectually at the monster's emaciated arms. The Wendigo leaned in close, its fetid breath washing over Akecha's face. Its lipless mouth stretched wide, dagger teeth dripping saliva. It meant to bite, to rip out his throat and feast on his still pulsing blood. A wavering darkness encroached on the edges of his sight. So this was how it would end, alone in this cave, just another meal for an insatiable demon. As Akeketa teetered on the precipice of death, something stirred deep within him, an ancestral memory rising from the depths of his genes, the voices of the Navajo elders chanting in the firelight. He felt them with him then, the spirits of the land, of his people. They whispered the old wisdom, the secret ways to defeat the Wendigo. With his last fading strength, Akeketa began to chant in a strained rasp. The ancient Navajo words rolled off his tongue, seizing the creature's attention. Its fiery eyes widened in what might have been fear. Akeketa continued the chant, his voice rising, the syllables echoing off the close cave walls until they reverberated like thunder. The Wendigo released its crushing grip and staggered back, long hands clamped over its ears, a keening wail building in its throat. Akeketa advanced on the monster, stalking forward, the power of the chant ringing from his raw throat. The Wendigo shrank from him, retreating from the cave into the night forest, but he pursued it relentlessly, driving it on with the magic in his words, in his blood. The Wendigo gave a final piercing shriek and dissipated like mist in the sun, banished by the strength of the ancient ways. Aketa sagged to his knees as sudden silence descended, the imprint of the creature's talons livid on his neck. His head swam and he gasped hungrily for air. The impossible had happened. He had survived an encounter with the legendary Wendigo, with Yi Nolodusi, the hunger that walks. All he wanted now was to get out of this cursed forest and never look back. 3 days later, Akeketa sat in the passenger seat of an army Humvee as it bounced over the rugged Forest Service roads, the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest a receding smudge in the rear view. After banishing the Wendigo, it had taken him nearly a day to hike out to the nearest ranger station, half delirious with exhaustion and dehydration. Once he made contact with the army, they had sent a retrieval team immediately. He leaned his head against the window, watching the pines thin into sparse scrubland on the way back to Phoenix. His reflection in the dusty glass was nearly unrecognizable. Gaunt cheeks, sunken eyes, a patchwork of cuts and bruises. The livid bruises ringing his throat stood out like a macabre necklace. But it was the haunted shadow in his dark eyes that troubled him most. The events of the past few days felt more like a fever dream than reality. Had he really fought a mythic monster and survived? Had the spirits of his ancestors truly come to his aid? The debriefing with his commanding officers had been surreal. They refused to believe his wild tale, writing it off as hallucinations brought on by isolation and stress. Trauma, they said. There were no such things as Wendigos. Maybe they were right. Maybe it had all been in his head, a product of too many of his grandfather's scary stories and the madness of the wilderness. He desperately wanted to believe that, but deep down, Aketa knew the truth. He had stared into the abyss of a ravenous evil as old as the land itself. He had heard the whispering voices of the ancients. That wasn't something a man could easily forget. Aketa closed his eyes and tried to will away the shudder that rippled through him. He should be thankful to be alive, to be going home to Maria and Shaitan, to his little basement apartment and his piles of overdue bills. Suddenly all his problems before this mission seemed so trivial, so inconsequential. What did debt matter in the face of undying horrors? He felt the Humvee slow and opened his eyes. There, on the near horizon, rose the hazy silhouette of the Phoenix skyline. The glinting spires of downtown, the boxy sprawl of suburbs, the angular geometry of human civilization. No dark, endless woods haunted by hungry shadows, just blessed concrete and asphalt and millions of people going about their ordinary lives, oblivious to the monsters that walked unseen beside them. As they reached the outer belt of the city, Akeka let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. He had made it back from the nightmare. Maybe, in time, with the balm of the mundane routines of home and family, he could begin to heal the mental scars, to convince himself it had all been a grand hallucination, a phantasm of the mind. But that night, as he readied for bed in his familiar room, the lights of the city twinkling beyond his curtains, Akeketa found an old photo while unpacking his ruck. It was creased and faded, dode-geared at the corners. In it, a smiling man in army fatigue stood with his arm thrown around a pretty petite woman in nurse's scrubs, Akeketa's mother, taken before he was born. His father's face, though, arrested his attention and made his blood freeze in his veins. It was a hungry face, an eager face, as gaunt and sharp as a blade. A demon's face, smiling with too many teeth. In a rush of nausea, Akeketa realized why the Wendigo's voice had sounded so disturbingly familiar, and as he stared into his father's feral eyes, a ghostly whisper shivered at the edges of his hearing. "You are my son, little rabbit. One day the hunger will take you too." The old Ford pickup bounced and lurched down the overgrown forest road, towering pines closing in on either side. Special Agent John Hokie gripped the steering wheel tightly, eyes straining to see through the pre-dawn gloom. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted from the long nighttime drive from Phoenix. Hokie was a 15-year veteran of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. He had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, investigating crimes committed by U.S. military personnel. Despite his experience, this new assignment filled him with unease. A string of gruesome killings and disappearances had occurred in this remote corner of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest over the past several months. Hokie's commanders suspected a rogue soldier was responsible, possibly a member of the elite Green Berets who trained in these very woods. They had tasked Hokie with tracking the killer down, quietly and covertly, to avoid a public relations disaster for the Army. Checking his GPS, Hokie saw that he was nearing the abandoned hunting cabin that would serve as his base of operations. The primitive accommodations were a far cry from his tidy suburban home back in Phoenix, where his wife Lori and their 2 young daughters waited for his return. Money had been tight ever since Lori got laid off from her teaching job. Hokie had jumped at the hazardous duty bonus that came with this assignment, as much as he dreaded leaving his family. Parking in front of the ramshackle cabin, Hokie retrieved his gear from the truck bed, a olive drab rucksack, an M4 carbine, and a hard-sided case containing satellite communications equipment. As he fumbled with the rusty lock on the cabin door, a sudden noise from the woods made him whirl around, hand darting to the pistol on his hip. He scanned the tree line, ears straining. The forest was deathly silent, without even the chirp of a bird or insect. Shaking his head, Hokie shouldered his way inside the cabin. Dust swirled in the beam of his flashlight as Hokie cleared the small interior. Animal droppings littered the floor, and a foul odor permeated the air. Setting his rucksack down on the filthy mattress in the corner, Hokie unfolded a topographic map of the area on the rough-hewn table. Red X's marked where the killings had taken place. At first glance, the sites seemed to form no discernible pattern. But looking closer, Hokie noticed that they were all located within a 5-mile radius of a local landmark known as Devil's Tower. According to Apache legend, Devil's Tower was once the lair of a fearsome creature known as Mogollon. Half man and half beast, Mogollon terrorized nearby villages, abducting people and devouring them alive. Only after a great battle did a band of Apache warriors succeed in trapping the monster inside its cave. They sealed the entrance with boulders and performed a powerful singing ceremony so that Mogollon would never escape to threaten humankind again. Of course, Hoki put no stock in children's ghost stories. He was after a flesh-and-blood killer, not some mythical boogeyman. Still, the desolate country around Devil's Tower seemed like a good place to start his search. Checking his rifle and gear, Hoki set off on foot into the lightning forest. Even in early morning, the air was stifling, laden with the lush vegetative smell of rot and growth. Hoki moved slowly and carefully, alert for any sign of human passage. Snapped twigs, disturbed earth, a thread of clothing snagged on a briar. Any of these could betray his quarry's presence. After hours of fruitless hiking, the sun now high overhead, Hoki paused for a rest on a flat rock outcropping. Stripping off his sweat-soaked jacket, he fished a pouch of beef jerky and a canteen from his rucksack. The gamey, salt-cured meat reminded him of the venison jerky his father used to make each fall after the annual deer hunt. Hoki's father, a full-blooded Apache, had taught him everything he knew about tracking and surviving in the wild. Hoki's chest tightened as he recalled the last time he saw his father, wasting away from lung cancer in a VA hospital. A sudden rattle in the underbrush snapped Hoki out of his reverie. In one fluid motion, he drew his pistol and pivoted toward the sound, thumb disengaging the safety. There, not 30 feet away, crouched a man-like shape, eyes glinting with feral malice. Hoki's blood ran cold. What he was seeing was impossible, something out of a nightmare or a madman's ravings. It had the general form of a powerfully built man covered in shaggy fur, but no man's face ever wore such a twisted expression of rage and hunger. Hoki glimpsed yellow fangs and pointed, tufted ears. The creature took a step forward, and Hoki saw that its feet were not feet at all, but cloven hooves. "Stop right there," Hoki commanded, the waver in his voice betraying his fear. "I'm a federal agent, and I'm armed." The beast snarled and coiled its hindquarters as if to spring. Hoki fired a warning shot into the earth at its feet, planning to put the next bullet right between its hellish eyes. But faster than thought, the creature whirled and bounded away through the trees, vanishing like a ghost. Hoki sent a few futile shots zinging after it before lowering his trembling pistol. What in God's name had he just seen? Holstering his weapon, Hoki hurried over to where the creature had crouched. The leaf litter was trampled and torn, as if by a great struggle. Crouching down to look closer, Hoki's eye fell upon a glint of metal in the dirt. It was a dog tag chain, snapped as if it had been ripped from someone's neck. Heart hammering, Hoki turned over the stamped metal tag to read the name. Lore-I Hoki. Hoki stared at his wife's name stamped into the dull metal, numb with shock. This was impossible. Lori was safe at home with the girls, 100 miles away. With shaking hands, he clutched the dog tag in his fist, squeezing until the edges bit into his palm. Only then did he see the dark stains spattered across the surrounding leaves. Blood, and a lot of it by the look of things. Hoki's combat instincts kicked in and he began searching the area in an ever-widening circle. He soon found a trail of broken vegetation leading deeper into the woods, marked by intermittent blood spatters. Pausing only to chamber a round in his rifle, Hoki set off at a fast trot. If Lori was out here somewhere, hurt or worse, he had to reach her immediately. Nothing else mattered. The sweltering woods closed in around Hoki as he crashed through the undergrowth, heedless of the noise he was making. The trail wound up the steep slope of Devil's Tower, the ancient basaltic formation looming above the trees. Hoki's lungs seared and his legs cramped, but he forced himself onward. A wave of dizziness overcame him and he stumbled, nearly pitching headlong down a ravine. Gasping, he leaned against the ravine's crumbling lip. As his vision cleared, he realized he was looking down into the mouth of a large cave. Recognition jolted through him like a lightning strike. He had seen this cave before, in an old black-and-white photograph in his father's collection. According to family lore, Hoki's great-great-grandfather had been one of the Apache warriors who fought the legendary battle against Mogollon the Man-Eater. This was the cave where they had imprisoned the beast, sealing it in for eternity. A primal dread crept over Hoki as he gazed into the inky black mouth of the cave. Steeling himself, Hoki unclipped a flashlight from his belt and descended into the ravine. The cool air from the cave hit his sweaty face as he approached the entrance. Pointing his rifle into the murk with one hand and his light with the other, he advanced into the cave. At first he saw nothing but damp rock walls and the skittering reflections of surprised cave crickets. Then his flashlight beam fell across something on the sandy floor that made his heart seize. A woman's hiking boot streaked with drying blood. Lori's boot, he was certain. Eyes straining, he panned his light around the cave, dreading what else he might discover. There, at the back of the cave, something caught the flashlight beam. A huddled shape slumped against the wall. Hoki rushed over and gasped. It was a man, dressed in shredded army camouflage, his body torn open from throat to groin. Bits of viscera dangled obscenely. Biting back bile, Hoki played his light over the savaged face. Though maimed beyond recognition, the dead man's red hair and freckled skin were unmistakable. It was Private Owen McInnes, one of the missing soldiers, so the creature hadn't taken Lori after all. Relief surged through Hoki, followed by renewed fear. The beast was still out there somewhere, and Lori and his daughters were no safer than they had been an hour ago. Hoki whirled to make his way out of the cave, but froze when a sound echoed from the entrance tunnel behind him, a scuffling of feet on loose rock and a wet snuffling noise that made his hackles rise. The creature had followed him inside, and now, as a growl reverberated through the chamber, Hoki realized he was trapped. Hoki thumbed the safety off his rifle and aimed it with shaking hands toward the entrance of the cave. The flashlight beam taped to the barrel illuminated the narrow tunnel in a stark white circle. For a long moment, the only sound was the blood roaring in Hoki's ears. A flash of movement at the edge of the light, Hoki fired, the muzzle flash momentarily lighting up the cavern. The bullet ricocheted off the wall in a shower of sparks. A guttural roar shook the chamber, and Hoki glimpsed a massive, fur-covered shoulder charging toward him. Hoki triggered a sustained burst from his rifle, knowing he had a scant seconds before the beast was on him. Hot brass casings spat from the ejection port, pinging off the stone. At this range he couldn't miss, and was rewarded by an ear-splitting squeal of pain. The creature thrashed and slammed against the wall, but kept coming with terrible single-mindedness, and then it was on him, all claws and teeth and fetid breath. Hoki's rifle was knocked spinning from his hands. He fell to the sandy floor beneath the creature's bulk, scrabbling desperately for the knife on his belt. A giant hand closed around his throat and lifted him bodily from the ground. Hoki's vision started to tunnel as the stinking claws crushed his windpipe. Stabbing pain exploded in Hoki's side, and he felt the sickening sensation of talons sinking into his guts. The creature was disemboweling him, ripping through skin and muscle like tissue paper to get at the rich organs beneath. So this is how it ends, Hoki thought dimly, dangling like a ragdoll in the beast's titanic grip. I'm sorry, Lori. Suddenly, an explosion of light and sound filled the cave, and Hoki found himself falling. He hit the ground hard, gagging and wheezing. Rolling onto his side, he clutched at his perforated abdomen, trying to stem the torrent of blood. A tall figure in a black hood stood over the fallen creature, a dripping obsidian blade in its hand. For a delirious moment, Hoki wondered if the Grim Reaper himself had come to claim him. Then the figure spoke in a familiar voice. Hang on, John. I've got a medkit in the truck. It was Joe Yassy, one of the Apache Reservation police who patrolled the area around Devil's Tower. The two men went way back, having served together in the army. Yassy had been there the day Hoki mustered out to join the Criminal Investigation Division. Yassy dropped to his knees beside Hoki and produced a pressure bandage from his pack. As he worked to bind Hoki's wounds, Yassy explained how he had pieced together the same clues about the creature's lair. I figured you'd be here too, bro. Lori called me when she couldn't reach you earlier. She thought you might have done something stupid, and I guess she was right. Yassy applied a blood-clotting powder and helped Hoki to sit up. He nodded to the obsidian knife he had dropped on the cave floor, passed down from my great-grandfather. Legend says it's the same blade used to kill Mogallan all those years ago. Looks like it still does the trick. Hoki looked over at the unmoving bulk of the creature. It seemed smaller in death, like a costume that had lost its stuffing. Yassy stood up and retrieved Hoki's rifle. Can you walk? I'll bring the truck around to the cave and we'll get you to the hospital. Not sure how we're gonna write up this report though. Might have to leave out some of the details. Special Agent John Hoki awoke to harsh fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of a heart monitor. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was or how he had gotten there. Then it all came rushing back in a jumble of blood and fear. Devil's Tower, the creature, his wife's dog tags. He tried to sit up and gasped as white-hot pain lanced through his midsection. Easy there, John, said a familiar voice. Joe Yassy, still in his black field jacket, sat in a chair beside Hoki's hospital bed reading an Outdoor Life magazine. He set the magazine down and leaned forward. Docs say you'll make a full recovery, but you're gonna have one hell of a scar. Chicks dig scars though, right? Hoki managed a ghost of a smile. Trust Joe to crack wise at a time like this. The two men had served together in a sniper team in Afghanistan, and Yassy's twisted sense of humor had gotten them through more than one hairy situation. Hoki's spirits fell, though, as he remembered the sight of his wife's dog tags clutched in the creature's claws. Joe, Lori. The girls. Are they? They're fine, John. Worried sick about you, but fine. Lori's downstairs getting the girls some snacks from the vending machine. She'll be up to see you in a minute. Hokie heaved a sigh, causing his stitches to pull. He eyed the clear IV line snaking into his arm, wondering what kind of painkillers they had him on. His head felt packed with gauze. What about it? Is it really dead? Yossi nodded grimly. Yep. Dragged the body out of the cave myself and burned it on a pyre. Wasn't about to let Uncle Sam get their hands on it for study. Some things are better left buried. He saw the question in Hokie's eyes. I reported back to CID that their rogue soldier theory was correct. Told them you killed the perp in a shootout at the cave, but he took you down with him. By the time they get out there, they won't find anything left but ashes and a few scraps of Private McInnes's uniform. And Devil's Tower, Tribal Council is pushing to get the whole area designated off-limits. A protected cultural site or something? Shouldn't be hard considering all the bad juju that's gone down there. Yossi stood up and clapped a hand on Hokie's shoulder. Get some rest, Kemosabe. You took down a literal demon. Not the kind of thing you walk away from unchanged. But your family still needs you, maybe now more than ever. Don't go chasing any ghosts on my account. With that, Yossi departed, leaving Hokie alone with the beeping machines and his whirlwind thoughts. He sank back against the pillows and closed his eyes, trying to will the residual terror out of his mind. Maybe Yossi was right. Maybe it was time to hang up his gun and badge and focus on being there for Lori and the girls. God knows they had been through enough, but deep down, Hokie knew letting go wouldn't be so easy. He had seen the ravenous gleam in the creature's eyes, the unquenchable hunger for human flesh. What if there were others of its kind still out there, biding their time in forgotten caves and hollows? He couldn't just walk away, not now that he knew the truth. As if summoned by his dark imaginings, an unearthly howl echoed from somewhere beyond the hospital walls, raising the hairs on the back of Hokie's neck. Autumn sunlight slanted through the pines as John Hokie made his way down the overgrown trail, Lori at his side. They had driven up from Phoenix early that morning to hike together among the turning leaves, just the two of them. The girls were staying the weekend with Lori's parents. Hokie and Lori walked hand in hand, the only sounds the crunch of their boots and the occasional bird call. Lori had been hesitant when he first suggested this trip, painful memories of the previous fall still fresh. But Hokie felt a strange compulsion to retrace his steps, to prove to himself that the creature in the cave had been real. After a couple hours of steady hiking, they crested a rise and Devil's Tower came into view, a dark fist of igneous rock thrusting up from the forest. Hokie felt Lori's hand tighten in his. He gave what he hoped was a reassuring squeeze. As they drew closer, Hokie saw that a sturdy chain-link fence now ringed the perimeter of the tower, plastered with warning signs. This area closed until further notice. Trespassers will be prosecuted. You see, said Lori, I told you it would still be sealed off. Can we please head back now? Hokie nodded, and they turned around to make the return trek. They hadn't gone more than a few paces when a sudden gust of chill wind swept through the trees, carrying a stomach-churning stench of decay. The forest fell preternaturally silent. Exchanging a worried glance, Hokie unslung the rifle from his shoulder and chambered around. In the year since the incident, he had not once ventured into the woods unarmed. A shrill scream rang out, raising the hair on Hokie's arms. Then another, and another. The screams were coming from the direction of the tower, growing louder and more frenzied. Hokie looked to Lori, who stood frozen in shock, face drained of color. Run, he told her. Get back to the truck and call Joe. Tell him it's happening again. John, no. I won't leave you. You have to. Think of the girls. Tears welling in her eyes, Lori gave him a fierce kiss, then turned and raced back down the path. Hokie advanced cautiously up the slope to the fence line, rifle at the ready. The screaming reached a crescendo, then cut off abruptly. In the ringing silence that followed, Hokie sensed a presence behind him. He whirled around. There, not 10 feet away, crouched the creature, yellow eyes blazing with preternatural hunger. Blood dripped from its claws and stained its matted fur. It bared its fangs in a savage grin, as if relishing Hokie's horror. Then it spoke, in a guttural, rasping voice that sounded like gravestones being ground to dust. Hello again, John Hokie. Hokie gaped in disbelief. This was impossible. He had seen the thing dead, burned to ashes, and that voice, it sounded disturbingly familiar. WHO, what are you? Hokie demanded, fighting to keep his rifle trained on the beast. The creature rose up to its full, towering height. As Hoki watched in mounting dread, its form seemed to ripple and change, the fur melting away to reveal sallow, pockmarked skin. It was transforming into a man Hoki recognized from his childhood. "Dad?" Hoki gasped. The figure smiled, exposing rotting teeth. "You thought I was dead, didn't you, boy? Thought you could forget your old man? Move on to this nice life with your perfect little family? But I've always been here, waiting." Hoki reeled back as if struck. It couldn't be his father. His father had died of lung cancer 3 years ago, and yet a twig snapped behind him and Hoki spun around. There were more of them now, their eyes glinting red in the shadows between the trees. Dozens of them, and at their center, a small shape with auburn hair. "No," Hoki breathed. "Lori," he started forward, but an iron grip closed around his arm. He looked up into his father's, no, the creature's, leering face. "She's one of us now, John. Just like you've always been, deep down." Hoki screamed and jerked awake, nearly ripping out his IV line. He doubled over in the hospital bed, shaking uncontrollably. A dream. It had only been a dream, he told himself. The same dream that had haunted him for a year now. Lori, dozing in a chair by his bedside, leaped up and wrapped her arms around him. "Shush, it's okay, baby, I'm here, I'm here." Hoki clung to her, burying his face in her hair to inhale her scent. She was real, she was safe. He chanted it like a mantra until the horror receded, but deep in his bones, Hoki knew the nightmare was far from over. The creature was still out there somewhere, waiting. Devil's Tower was still hungry, and despite what he told himself in the light of day, Hoki wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a twisted sort of truth in his father's words. What if some dark part of him was inextricably tied to that cave, to the unspeakable things that lurked within? He didn't know, but he had a terrible feeling he was fated to find out. One way or another, Devil's Tower would draw him back to finish what he started, and God help anyone who stood in its way. The chopper descended through the inky darkness, its spotlight probing the dense Arizona forest below. Captain Escueto Chavez gripped his pack and M4 carbine as he prepared to fast rope down to the LZ. Intel was sketchy, but there were reports of something big and vicious stalking these woods, something inhuman. As a member of the Army's elite supernatural threats unit, Chavez had faced some weird shit before. Chupacabras in New Mexico, a Wendigo in Montana, but never a Sasquatch. He wasn't even sure they existed outside of blurry photos and sensational tabloid stories. Until now. "Sir, we're 50 feet above the LZ," the crew chief shouted over the roar of the rotors. "You're clear to descend on my mark. 3, 2, 1, go." Chavez slid down the rope into a small clearing ringed by towering ponderosa pines. The chopper ascended back into the night sky, its rhythmic thumping fading into silence. He was utterly alone in the vast wilderness. "Chavez to base, I'm on the ground. Beginning my mission," he said into his radio. "Copy that. Proceed to target area and report any sign of the creature. Lethal force is authorized. Get in, get it done, get out. Base out." Chavez took a deep breath of crisp mountain air. He had a bad feeling about this op from the start. But orders were orders. He thought back to the cramped on-base housing where his wife Shyla and their 3 kids waited for his return. They barely scraped by on an E6 salary. Chavez volunteered for this mission, and the hefty bonus that came with it, so he could finally give his family the life they deserved. Maybe even buy a little cabin up here in the mountains, spend their summers fishing and hiking as a family. A blood-curdling howl echoed through the forest, snapping him back to the present. It sounded vaguely simian, but deeper and more guttural than any ape Chavez had ever heard. He raised his carbine and peered into the shadowy tree line. The hunt was on. Chavez moved silently through the forest, the damp underbrush masking his footfalls. These were the same highlands where his Apache ancestors once hunted deer and elk. As a boy on the reservation, the tribal elders taught him to track, forage, and melt unseen into the wilderness, skills that served him well in ranger school and now as an STU operator. He paused at the edge of a ravine and knelt to examine the soil. There were tracks, but not like anything he'd seen before. Humanoid but larger, the prints sunk deep into the soft earth. Chavez guessed the creature weighed at least 800 pounds. He froze as a pungent, musky odor filled his nostrils. It smelled like wet dog mixed with rotting meat. Something was watching him from the trees on the other side of the ravine. Chavez slowly raised his head. 2 yellow eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the dim moonlight. They had to be at least 8 feet off the ground. The creature huffed, its breath visible in the cold night air. Chavez thumbed his rifle's safety off. Then the eyes disappeared as the creature turned and loped away into the forest. Chavez exhaled. He briefly considered pursuing it, but the ravine looked at least 40 feet deep. Better to find a way across. He glanced at the topographic map on his wrist dagger. There was an old Forest Service bridge a half-mile south. If he hurried, he might be able to pick up the creature's trail on the other side. As he jogged through the woods, Chavez couldn't shake an uneasy sense of déjà vu, like he'd been here before. There was something eerily familiar about this part of the forest. Chavez crossed the rickety wood bridge, his boots thumping hollowly on the weathered planks. On the other side, he quickly found the creature's prints and began following them west, deeper into the wilderness. The tracks led him to the entrance of a narrow box canyon. Chavez hesitated. The sheer rock walls made it a perfect spot for an ambush. But he couldn't turn back now, not when he was so close. He crept cautiously into the canyon, scanning the ridgelines for any sign of movement. 100 yards in, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. There, jutting from the canyon wall, was the wreckage of a helicopter, an Apache gunship, just like the ones Chavez flew in Afghanistan. What was it doing here, in the middle of nowhere? As he approached the downed chopper, a glint of metal caught his eye. Dog tags dangled from a rusted chain caught on a protruding piece of fuselage. No, it couldn't be. With a shaking hand, Chavez grabbed the tags and wiped away the grime. The name engraved on them hit him like a punch to the gut. Chavez, Ascueto J. 756-233383. OPOS. Apache. They were his tags. But that was impossible. He was standing right here, alive, his tags around his neck. What the hell was going on? A guttural growl emanated from the shadows at the back of the canyon. Chavez spun to see the creature emerge from behind a boulder, its shaggy fur matted with blood, yellow fangs bared in a snarl. It was bipedal, at least 9 feet tall, with thick, corded muscles rippling beneath its hide. The creature roared and charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Chavez flew backwards as a massive arm swatted him like a rag doll. He slammed into the canyon wall and crumpled to the ground, his carbine clattering out of reach. Through blurred vision, Chavez saw the creature looming over him, raising a taloned paw for the killing blow. A thunderous boom echoed off the canyon walls. The creature stumbled back, a gaping hole blown in its chest. Chavez looked up to see a squad of heavily armed soldiers in black fatigues rappelling down from the cliffs above. Go, 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 take that fucker out. One of the soldiers opened up on full auto, stitching the creature from groin to neck. It bellowed in pain and rage, lashing out at its attackers. But there were too many, their armor-piercing rounds chewing through flesh and bone like paper. The creature toppled backwards, its lifeblood pooling on the dusty canyon floor. It heaved one last rattling breath and was still. A soldier grabbed Chavez's arm and hauled him to his feet. Captain Chavez, what's the last thing you remember? Chavez shook his head, trying to clear the fog. I was on a mission, solo recon, tracking the creature. The soldier nodded grimly. Sir, I'm sorry, but that's not entirely accurate. You disappeared on that mission over 3 years ago. We've been searching for you ever since. 3 years? That's not... I don't understand. Your chopper went down in hostile territory. By the time we reached the crash site, you were gone, no sign of your body. Intel reported a Sasquatch-like creature in the area. We've been hunting it, and you, ever since. Chavez's head swam. Memories came trickling back, fire and metal raining from the sky, searing pain as talons raked his flesh. An ancient cave, hideous creatures gathered around a blood-stained altar. His legs buckled and he sank to his knees. It wasn't just déjà vu he'd felt out in these woods. He'd lived this nightmare before, been transformed by the very monstrosity he was sent to destroy. Now it all came crashing back in brutal clarity. My God, he whispered. What have I done? The soldier helped Chavez to the waiting Blackhawk on the canyon rim. Inside, a medic attended to his wounds while the soldier cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sir, I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife Shyla, your kids, they held out hope you were alive for a long time. But after a year, the army declared you killed in action. Shyla, she took it hard. Started drinking, pills. The soldier looked away. Chavez felt a cold knot of dread forming in his gut. She couldn't take care of herself, let alone 3 little ones. CPS took the kids, put them in foster care. Then one day Sheila's neighbor noticed she hadn't seen her in a while. Police found her body. I'm sorry, sir. She OD'd. A howl of anguish tore from Chavez's throat. He buried his face in his hands. The bleak future he'd envisioned, The cozy cabin, his children playing in the sun, it was all ash now, scattered to the unforgiving winds. What a fool he'd been, chasing money in the darkness. He'd had his treasure all along, and carelessly squandered it. The bitter irony was almost too much to bear. The Blackhawk rose above the tree line, leaving the blood-soaked canyon behind. As Chavis gazed numbly out the window, he saw his own ghostly reflection staring back at him, gaunt, scarred, utterly hollowed out. Just another broken thing, left to haunt this god-forsaken wilderness. The doctors said it was a miracle Chavis survived his time in the wilds. The creature transmitted some unknown pathogen to him, warped his body and mind. They promised the mutations were reversible, that he'd be back to normal with the proper therapies. Physically, at least, Chavis didn't care. Normal was a life that no longer existed. He'd been given a second chance, but at the cost of everything he once held dear. The children were placed with a good Apache family on the reservation, they told him. They'd be raised in the old traditions, taught the stories and wisdom of their people. It was the one bright spot in all this, knowing they'd be spared the hardships he and Shala faced as army brats bouncing from post to post. Weeks turned into months. The doctors deemed Chavis fit to return to duty. His commanding officer offered him an honorable discharge. "No one would blame you for getting out after all you've been through," he said with a sad smile. But Chavis couldn't imagine a civilian life, not anymore. Wearing the uniform was the only thing that still made sense. Besides, STU needed him more than ever now that the existence of creatures like Sasquatch was a confirmed reality. He had an obligation to make sure no one else suffered his fate. So on a crisp fall morning, he stood at attention while the CO pinned a purple heart to his chest. Chavis stared straight ahead as a chilling realization took hold. That dark canyon in Arizona hadn't been an end, but a twisted new beginning. A second life, forged in blood and sorrow. Perhaps it was fitting, Chavis thought. He was a monster who hunted monsters, forever doomed to stalk the shadows between worlds. After what he'd seen, what he'd become, a normal life was the only thing more terrifying than the horrors that awaited him. As the first snow dusted the pines outside, Chavis shouldered his rifle and headed out into the gathering dark. The hunt was on. Sequoia Hawk Benally had seen his share of combat. The 32-year-old U.S. Army Ranger served 2 tours in Afghanistan, honing his skills in unconventional warfare and survival. But nothing could have prepared him for the secret mission he'd been assigned deep in the Coconino National Forest of northern Arizona. The mission briefing had been vague. Investigate reports of strange activity near an abandoned logging camp. Gather intelligence on any potential threats to national security. Maintain radio silence unless absolutely necessary. Hawk had a bad feeling about it from the start. The brass didn't send a seasoned ranger on a solo mission into the middle of nowhere for no reason. Hawk had grown up on the Navajo reservation in Arizona and spent his childhood exploring these very woods with his grandfather, learning the ways of his ancestors. He was at home among the towering Ponderosa pines and Red Rock canyons. After high school, Hawk left the reservation to join the Army, seeking a better life. But military paychecks didn't go far, and he still struggled financially. Part of why he agreed to this odd assignment, despite his unease. "Never volunteer for anything," his platoon sergeant used to say. Too late for that. Hawk parked his Jeep at the end of a rutted logging road and shouldered his pack, his M4 carbine slung across his chest. The cabin that would serve as his base was a 10-mile hike in. He savored the warm sun on his bronze skin and the scent of pine needles and sage as he set off alone into the wilderness. He found the cabin just before dusk. It was so ill-kept that calling it rustic would be generous. The weathered timbers were rotting and the roof sagged, definitely abandoned. Hawk made a thorough sweep of the area but found no signs of recent human activity nor anything overtly suspicious. As darkness fell, he built a small fire in the ancient stone fireplace, ate an MRE and settled onto the musty cot to rest, rifle within easy reach. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Hawk was startled awake by a blood-curdling scream shattering the pre-dawn stillness. He leapt off the cot, grabbed his rifle, and scanned the dark cabin, heart pounding. Silence. He crept to the door and eased it open, peering into the misty gloom. Another shriek rang out, raising the hairs on his neck. It sounded like a woman wailing in terror or agony. But what woman would be out here, miles from anywhere? He pulled out his night vision goggles and quickly searched the area again. Nothing. No heat signatures, no tracks, no evidence of any human presence besides his own. Unnerved, Hawk retreated back inside, senses on high alert. At first light, after a tense and sleepless night, he set out to patrol the surrounding area. The forest seemed normal at first, vibrant and full of life. Insects buzzing, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, but as he moved deeper into the woods, an eerie hush fell over everything. The birds and bugs went silent, as if an unseen presence had scared them into hiding. Hawk unslung his rifle and flipped off the safety. His skin prickled with the distinct sensation of being watched. There, in the trees to his left, a shadowy shape, he caught a blur of dark, shaggy fur and a fleeting impression of a face. Almost human, but not quite. It was there and gone in a blink. A twig snapped behind him. Hawk spun around, but saw only dappled sunlight and swaying branches. He knew the stories, of course. Every Navajo child grew up hearing tales of the Yeitso, the big god, a huge, hairy, man-like creature that roamed the wilderness. Grandpa had described it as an embodied spirit of nature that protected the land from evildoers. But what if the old stories were more than myth? What if something was really out there? No, that was crazy. Hawk shook off the fanciful thoughts and continued his patrol, alert for any tangible signs of a threat. But he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that he was no longer alone in this lonely wood. Days passed without further incident, but Hawk knew better than to let his guard down. Each day he ventured deeper into the backcountry, scouting the area around the cabin. He found an odd series of barefoot prints in the mud of a creek bank, human-like, but at least 18 inches long. He discovered a small cave littered with gnawed bones too large to have come from any native animal he knew. And he once glimpsed a pair of eerily intelligent eyes glinting in the night, far too high off the ground to belong to a deer or bear. To an outsider, such things might have seemed flimsy evidence of the impossible. But to Hawk, steeped in his people's ancient traditions, they felt like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. The Navajo taught that the world was full of spirits, both benevolent and malicious. You had to know how to interpret the signs they left on the landscape. Something was out there in the forest, something big and not quite natural. The wailing cries continued each night, always at a distance but never far. Sometimes they sounded almost sorrowful, other times enraged. Hawk tried to track them but could never get a fix on their source. He took to sleeping in his boots with his rifle loaded. On the 8th night, Hawk was jerked from sleep by the howl of a coyote just outside, the tricky one, sacred to his people. Heart pounding, he grabbed his gun and flung open the door. There on the cabin steps, illuminated in the moonlight, was a small woven pouch decorated with beads and bits of bone. Hawk knew it well, an amulet of protection like the one Grandpa had given him long ago. He hadn't seen such exquisite craftwork since his boyhood on the reservation. But who had left it? And did it mean he was being watched over, or walking into a trap? He couldn't be sure, but he sensed that the strange events were building to a head. Time was running short. He tucked the amulet into his pocket, whispered a prayer to the spirits, and steeled himself for a confrontation. On the 10th morning, Hawk struck out at first light, determined to find answers. He hiked for miles, pushing deeper into the untouched heart of the forest than he had ever ventured before. An oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by his own muffled footfalls. Then the birds and insects and creatures of the woods seemed to cry out all at once in an overwhelming crescendo, as if warning of an approaching menace. The earth shook with a rhythm like monstrous footsteps. A shadow fell over Hawk. He looked up and froze. Not 30 yards away, a massive creature lumbered into the clearing. It stood upright like a man but was far larger, 8 or 9 feet tall, with hulking shoulders and long, shaggy fur covering its entire body. Its face was ancient, nearly human, but with piercing amber eyes and a powerful jaw. Yeitso, the big god, here in the flesh. For a breathless moment they faced each other, man and beast. Hawk had the uncanny feeling the creature was looking into his very soul, weighing his motives and worth. He raised his rifle and hesitated. This entity, however shocking, was a sacred being to his people. Was it truly a threat, or a guardian? The creature huffed and beat its chest, a thunderous sound that reverberated through Hawk's body. Not a clear threat, but a warning. The message was clear. I am not your enemy, but I will defend this land if I must. Tread carefully, small one. The giant creature turned and began to walk away. Every instinct screamed to let it go, to flee this encounter with an impossible being. But Hawk's training kicked in. Investigate the threat, complete the mission. He took a deep breath and started after the creature into the dense woods. For hours, Hawk trailed the enormous being, ducking through brush and scrambling over fallen logs to keep up. They moved ever deeper into the wilderness, into places no human had likely set foot in decades, if ever. The creature never acknowledged Hawk, but never tried to evade him either. It was like being tolerated by a tiger that might, at any moment, decide you looked like prey. At last they reached a small opening in a sheer rock face, a cave mouth that seemed to swallow the meager daylight whole. The creature ducked inside without hesitation. Every rational part of Hawk's brain screamed not to follow it into that black maw. He had no idea what lay within, a maze of tunnels, more creatures, his own tomb, but he'd come too far to turn back now. He clicked on his tactical light, took a steadying breath, and stepped into the unknown. The cave narrowed immediately into a constricted stone corridor barely wide enough for Hawk's shoulders. The gritty red rock glistened with condensation and mineral deposits that glittered in the beam of his light. Hawk scraped and belly-crawled and wriggled his way forward, every inch fearing he'd get stuck, forcing down the panic bubbling in his chest. There was no going back. After an eternity, the tunnel finally opened into a larger chamber. Hawk pulled himself free, gulping in musty air, and raised his light. What he saw staggered him. Bones. Hundreds of them, from creatures of all sizes, antlers and rib cages and femurs, some bleached with age, some with ragged bits of sinew still clinging to them. Otherworldly cave paintings danced across the walls in hues of ochre and crimson, looping spirals, bizarre humanoid shapes, ghostly handprints. And there, squatting in the center dais like a monarch on a throne, was the Yeyetso. It regarded Hawk with an air of time-worn wisdom, then rose on its tremendous haunches and lumbered off into another passageway. This time, Hawk's feet felt rooted to the floor. His mind whirled, trying to process all he had seen. What was this place? A burial ground? A temple? Both? Something deep within him, an ancestral knowing, whispered that he had stumbled onto a mystery not meant for the eyes of man. He thought again of Grandpa's stories and the old man's gruff admonitions. There are some questions better left unasked, some secrets the land keeps for herself, secrets like a primordial being that had guarded this hallowed ground since the dawn of time. Humbled, heart thundering, Hawk turned and crawled out the way he had come, suddenly desperate to feel the sun and wind on his face, to be standing under the open sky. Back in the forest he sank to his knees in the loam, overcome with awe and relief. He knew, with inexplicable certainty, that his mission was over. He would report back that nothing out here posed any threat to national security, because in a way nothing did. Yes, a huge mystical creature stalked these woods, but it was not a danger to be eliminated. It was a sacred wonder to be preserved at all costs, like the ancestral traditions Hawk still carried in his heart. He stood, squared his pack, and turned back toward civilization. But he knew part of him would always remain here, in the untamed heart of the wild, where the ancient spirits still walked, and some mysteries were never meant to be unraveled by the eyes of mankind. 2 weeks later, Hawk sat on the porch of his grandfather's rickety trading post on the reservation, watching sun splash over red sandstone cliffs. After debriefing his superiors, he'd requested indefinite leave. He told himself he just needed time to rest and clear his head. But in truth, something in those ineffable woods had altered him so deeply that the wider world felt untenable, at least for now. Grandpa shuffled out and eased into the chair beside him with a sigh. They sat in companionable silence, their faces weathered with the unspoken weight of lifetimes, their eyes seeing past the dunes to some far horizon. At last Grandpa spoke, voice gravelly with age. "You found it out there, didn't you? Ye eat so." The old one. Hawk turned to stare at him, stunned. He had not breathed a word of his encounter to anyone, let alone Grandpa. The old man met his eyes, his gaze unfathomable. "I always knew it was real, not just a story. Saw signs of it myself, when I was about your age." He gave a wheezy chuckle. "Didn't get as close as you, though. Count yourself lucky." "But how do you know that I—" Grandpa waved a gnarled hand. "It's in your eyes, boy, the wonder, the knowing. You've seen into the heart of the mystery now. Once the spirits touch you, you're never quite the same." Hawk swallowed hard, looking away. He thought of the pouch still tucked in his pocket, its very existence corroborating that the last weeks had been more than a fever dream. "What do I do now, Grandpa? I feel lost, like I'm standing in two worlds at once." The old man reached over and squeezed Hawk's knee with an iron grip. "You do what our people have always done. You carry the wisdom forward. You keep the old ways alive. Someday, you'll pass the stories on to some young one, just as I did to you. That's how we ensure the magic stays in the world." Hawk nodded slowly, his throat thick. For the first time since returning, his path felt a little clearer. He knew it might be a long road back to the man he used to be, if he ever made it there. Maybe this was his life now, 1 foot in the modern world, 1 in the ancient, a keeper of impossible secrets, a guardian on the threshold of the mundane and the mythical. But he found he didn't mind the idea, as overwhelming as it was. Someone had to help preserve the ancestral mysteries, might as well be him. He reached into his pocket, curling his fingers around the sacred amulet, and smiled. The sun dipped behind the cliffs, and the desert hummed with countless unseen lives, a wild song echoing from eons past into the untold future. Ak closed his eyes and let the ancient rhythm overtake him. He was ready to dream the world anew,